This is an interview with Robert Paul Howell on November 5th, 1984, and my name is Brian Nedler, and we are at 299 West Fifth Avenue in the kitchen doing this.
Columbus, Ohio.
Columbus, Ohio. Okay, I guess first of all, we'd like to hear a little about your family background, place, year of birth, parents, general lives, brothers and sisters, class background, ethnic roots, some things about the attitudes towards sexuality, and attitudes towards being different. And if you had any gay relatives that you knew of.
Okay, I was born on July the 5th, 1924, in St. Anne's Hospital in Columbus, Ohio. My father was of Huguenot descent, and my mother was German. I was one of a pair of twins that was born at that time. However, my twin brother, my mother, I had a sister 7 years older. My mother died before she left the hospital. And what else?
And when your brother died too.
And my brother died at Christmas time after our birth in July. Family attitude towards sexual just wasn't discussed. And I don't know that I had any gay relatives, although my mother had a brother that never married. But I thought he caroused around and drank and ran after women. I don't know.
How about attitudes towards being different?
Well, as I grew up, I knew something was wrong, but I didn't know what it was. And as I later found out I was gay. But I never, I liked girls as friends, but I never had any sexual interest in them.
Did you play with girls when you were younger?
I played with girls, and I played with girls' things. And whenever I go over to visit my girl cousin, she'd say, well, what do you want to do? And I'd always want to play with paper dolls. And then later on, when I was living with my grandmother, and she would come over, and we'd go to my grandmother's room and try on her stuff, her clothes and things. And we would pretend that we were going to Paris, and it was in the spring, and we'd sing Paris in the spring, tra-la, tra-la, and bedeck ourselves out with my grandmother's.
What was the adult attitude towards all of that?
Oh, I don't know. They never said anything, one way or another.
They did see you, though.
Yeah, that didn't say I shouldn't do it or I shouldn't do it.
Yeah. What year was that?
Well, this would have been through the 24 up through 35.
In the small town?
No, this was Columbus.
In Columbus.
Yeah.
How about your general class status, whatever?
Well, my father was secretary treasurer of the Columbus Malva Iron Company, and we owned our own home. And I guess I would say, middle class?
Okay. Where geographically did you come of age sexually? What were some of your initial early sexual experiences?
Well, even as a kid, as a grade schooler, we used to go to this Champion Theater on Friday nights. They'd have a cowboy movie and a cereal. And by the way, it only cost a dime. And some guy came in one night and sat next to me and took my hand and put it over on his dick and had me jack him off. And I thought that was great.
How old were you then?
Well, I was in grade school.
They let you go to the theater by yourself?
Yeah, it was neighborhood.
And you didn't tell anybody?
No. Well, I knew no better at the time.
But did you enjoy it?
Yeah, I thought it was great, I said. In those days, the streets were safe. And they knew where we were and how long we'd be gone. And all the kids went almost in a group, in the neighborhood. Then when I was in junior high, I guess, someone taught me how to masturbate. And we used to masturbate together. But that was all. And then when I was in senior high, I sucked my first cock and liked it. And I guess that was when I came out.
Okay. Did you have any guilt feelings about that?
Oh, yes. I was a Catholic by that time, and I had to confess it in the confession, and I felt very guilty.
What did the priest say?
Well, the priest always says, you shouldn't do it. You say you won't do it again, and of course you do.
Okay. What about other early sexual experiences? How did you learn about the gay life in Columbus?
Well, I found out about that when after I graduated from high school, and I came to Columbus to go to business college, and I found there were certain movie theaters, the Majestic, the Uptown, and the Southern, where you would go and sit by yourself, and then someone would sit beside you, and then we'd play with each other. And that was the extent of that. Uh, then also, if you wanted someone to pick you up, you cruised around the State House in the downtown Columbus. The State House occupied an entire square, and you would walk around that, or even go up into the State House grounds and cruise up around there.
Did you go through any kind of period of denial? Did you try to repress your sexuality at any point?
Well, I dated girls more as a cover, but I still knew what I was, and I never had any desire to have sex with a woman.
Okay. Did you tell your family?
I told my sister when I got out of the Army,
What year would that have been?
and that would have been in '45, and she said she already knew it. So she's the only one that I ever discussed it with until recently with my niece.
Okay. Why did you tell your sister?
Oh, because I wanted to be open about my lifestyle, I guess, and I had to tell her why I got out of the Army in the middle of a war, so I just told her.
So you were discharged for being gay.
Yes.
Did you ever hear of references to gay people in your town or neighborhood? Not necessarily using the word gay, but
Well, I heard talk about fairies, and I think that's the only.
well, maybe be more specific about that. When did you hear that?
Well, I think my cousin used it one time, and then we had a visitor from Detroit that was visiting us, and we were all in a nightclub, my aunt and uncle and the guests and myself. And I jokingly says to Nate, I said, "Well, let's dance, Nate." And he was going to, and I said, "Oh, I'm only kidding. Men don't dance with each other." And he said, "Yes, they do." He said, "Those guys are called fairies."
But did you know that applied to you?
I think I did by then.
Yeah. What words were used to refer to gay people then besides fairies? Is that
That's the only one I ever
I've
heard.
never heard any other word.
Mm-mm.
When was the first time you heard the word gay?
Well, it was even after I'd been come home on leave from when I was in the Royal Canadian Air Force. And I had picked up this sailor, and we went up and had sex. And he asked me if there were any gay bars in Columbus. And I started telling him about all the nightclubs, because that to me was a gay bar. And then he said, "Well, you don't know what I mean." And then I found out that gay meant something other than lively.
Did you have any older person that you hung around with, like a gay mentor? Was there like a gay mother type person in your life at that point? Or
No,
who did you hang out with?
the only my gay contemporaries, and a lover I had at one time was a few years older, but it wasn't anyone that took me under their wing, no.
So you were pretty much on your own.
Yes.
Who were some of your friends that were out in gay culture at that point? Maybe let's talk about before the war, maybe.
Before the war, I don't think I even really knew anyone.
No. Oh.
I didn't know that there were groups of gay people.
So your activities are pretty much the theaters
Yes.
at that point. Okay, so then what happened during the war? Why don't you talk about your going in the military in Canada? Go through that. So
Well,
get sort of a timeline.
I had gone a year to business college, and I decided just to take a little trip, and I went up to Canada to visit a pen pal. And while I was up there, I enlisted in the Air Force. And I was in the Air Force for a while. I tried to find gay areas in Toronto, where I was stationed most of the time, and I never found any gay people or gay areas. And I know there was some question about me in the Canadian Air Force, and they questioned some of my buddies, and they said, "Well, he's effeminate, but I don't think he's a prude." And so nothing ever happened. up in Canada. However, I'd come over on leave and to Columbus, to Detroit, and have sexual experiences then.
What kind of sexual experiences?
Well, I mean, what kind?
Well,
Fucking and
what
sucking.
what kind of stuff did you do in those days?
Well,
in
we-
Detroit. I mean,
we-
how open was it?
Well, there was the gay bar in Detroit, Art Harris's, and I don't know whether there were others there or not, but that seemed to be the main one. And then someone picked me up at a hotel bar in Detroit and took me out to a party out at 99 Lakeshore Drive in Grosse Pointe. And I didn't know that I was supposed to be spending the evening with the guy that lived there, and I wasn't consulted, so I wouldn't do it. I went back to Detroit.
Was it a big mansion out in Grosse Pointe?
Yes. It was it was kind of a rose-colored mansion, and I'm just wondering if it was the Newberry Mansion or not. I don't know.
Where was gay culture centered in those days? It doesn't sound like there were a whole lot of bars. So where would you say the center was? Where were people meeting?
Well, in Columbus at that time was the one gay bar was the Cabana Bar, and that was an openly gay bar.
This is during the war?
Yes. And then also in Columbus, the two main hotels on High Street at Brown, Broad, and High was the Deschler Wallach and the Neal House. And in the Deschler Wallach, downstairs was the Ionian Room, which was a supper club, dancing and live music. And the bar there was a good place to pick up servicemen, but it wasn't a gay bar per se. And then in the basement of the Neal House, there was a stag bar that occasionally gay people would attend. Also, in the Chittenden Hotel at Spring and High, there was the Oasis. And the Circle Bar there was a place to pick up gay people, mostly servicemen.
How would you go about picking up a serviceman? It seems like in our idea of things is it was very conservative. How would you go about doing that without getting your face punched in? I mean,
well, I don't know. You just would be at the bar, you'd get to talk, and you really never said anything about having sex. You know, you'd say, "Well, where are you gonna spend the night?" "Well, I have a hotel room," and you'd be invited up to the hotel room, and sometimes you didn't know until you got in the bed whether anything was going to happen or not.
did you ever have any bad experiences with things like that?
Well, not really. I had some sailor I took up to the room, and then I changed my mind after I got up there, so he punched me because I wouldn't do anything. But I never got into trouble because of what I did.
You never had any trouble with undercover cops? You never heard of any kind of thing like that? Or
I never heard of anything like that. If they had them, I don't know. But as I said, we never came right out and said, do you want your cock sucked or anything like that? And nothing was ever mentioned. It was just fell into place.
Very, very discreet. What kind of books or movies or plays did you know about or read, perhaps?
Well, of course, there weren't any plays that I can recall. The first gay book I read was The Well of Loneliness. Someone told me about it, and I checked it out of the public library. And I thought it was a great book because it was written about gay people. And, I realized that there are other people out there. And, of course, we had heard, I think, of Oscar Wilde, of course. And my roommate had a copy of Strange Brother. I read that. Now, that was the only men's book I can remember. I had a friend, somehow or other, I became acquainted with a lesbian that worked in the at McClellan's bookstore on North High Street in Columbus. And she would steer me toward books. And I remember one book called We Two Are Drifting, and another book called Trio. And it seemed to me that the author that wrote Young Man with the Horn, Dorothy Baker, wrote something gay. And
The saleswoman was lesbian, do you think?
Yeah, well, she was. Yeah, I knew she was.
So she was reading of herself and steering you towards them.
Yeah.
They asked here, did you ever see or hear about The Captive? And it was made. It sounds like maybe it's a movie in 1926 or a book. I've never heard of it myself.
I never heard of it.
Okay. What words did you use to describe yourself? Do you remember what word you used?
Well, gay,
They did use the word gay.
faggot. Not so much fruit. Of course, we called each other Mary and Deed Bess and things like that.
Okay. About gay code words other than Mary, maybe a little bit better words. Like nowadays, they use the word family. Is this person family or that? Did you have words like that?
I don't think we had anything like that I know of.
About modes of dress or signals of any sort?
No, because when you went out to the bar for the evening like that, you wore a coat and tie. In those days, you didn't go out to a bar without. Of course, now when you went to the gay bar, you could dress a little more informally. But if you were going to any place like the Ionian Room or the Stag Bar or the Oasis, you more or less wore a coat and tie.
Do you remember the first time you went to the Cabana? How did you find out about it?
This friend of mine that I was dating knew about it. And I can't even remember how I ever first met him. That's strange. But his name was Robert D. And he took me there. And it was a nice bar. It was leather and chrome, which was nice in those days. And they had a piano player that played music during the evening. And a lot of times there would be groups of straight people came in to see the homosexuals, the queers.
Oh, so it was known that it was a gay bar
Yes,
in the straight
yes.
community. Did they ever have any trouble with fights or police? Or
Never.
did people dance there?
No.
No, there was no dance.
No.
Just piano play.
Yeah.
People sing, things like that.
That wasn't that type of bar.
Sounds
Yeah.
like it was real sedate.
Yeah.
Was it a good cruise bar?
Well, yes. If you sat at the bar instead of at a table, yeah, you could meet someone. But I usually when I was going in there, I think I was dating or usually had someone.
Were there any kind of fashions or fads that were going through the community then?
There weren't any. You mean dress? You talking about dress?
That or, yeah.
Nothing about dress. As I said, it was we dressed conservative. If you were going to a nice place, you wore a shirt and tie. We had some sayings like "Deed Bess" and "How you douchin', same old solution." We talked about when someone did something real good, real well. They say, "Oh, honey, you win the pearl handle douchebag." Now, I don't know what a pearl handle douchebag is, but whatever it was the best you could get. So you won it.
Sounds like you were pretty campy.
Yeah, I guess we were sometimes those days. I know I was walking down the street with Miss Vicky, who is what we would call a street fairy now, and two women who I guess were whispering. I didn't see them, and when we passed them, she just turned and looked at them and says, "Yes, we are. So what?" And
What year would that have been?
oh gosh, that was in the 40s.
Great. Did you have other places that there were, like, did you have parties at private homes? I'm assuming there were no baths in Columbus then.
No.
Parks. You mentioned the State House lawn. You mentioned the movie houses. What about social parties type of things? Do you have those?
The only one, not at that time. No. Now, if we're talking about when I first came out, no. Later on, there were some homes where we would have parties.
What were some of those?
But, well, there used to be parties up at this friend of mine, this female impersonator named Fran Stillman. And she had an apartment at Mountain High. And a lot of the gay people would hang out there, and she would have parties. And also, the house at Governor Place would have parties. That was a house 2 doors from the governor's mansion on East Broad Street. And it was owned by an old, what we would say then, those days, an old auntie. And she rented all the sleeping rooms out to young gay guys. And we would have parties there.
Were those wild?
And then surprisingly enough at that time, which I think is amazing, there was a bar across from the fairgrounds called the Silver Slipper. And they billed one of their entertainers as Billy Kennedy, the pinup girl. And it was a guy doing drag numbers. And yet that was not a gay bar.
What were the parties like at these private homes? Were they real wild? Were they orgies? I mean,
No. This is the thing. We'd have parties. I used to entertain. Part of my one of my numbers I did was I would wrap up in white sheets with a headgear and rattle a big pair of rosaries and do an imitation of a nun at prayer. And then another time I entertained with putting on a multicolored afghan and putting a pillow down with a knife on it and would mime Un Verdi from Madame Butterfly. And
were these drag parties?
no, huh?
We
just entertained after we got there, yeah. I don't know. The only one time when I was living there, I remember I was working nights and they went out, the household all went to a party someplace in drag. And I know I had a Hattie Carnegie original green taffeta skirt with a black velvet top and beautiful beads around the neckline. And so I lent that to one of my friends. And I fixed all their hairs. At that time, I was going to beauty school, too. And I fixed all their hairs for them and got everyone ready to go to the party. And then I felt like Cinderella and I stayed home.
Oh. How segregated were things between men and women? There was only one gay bar. Was it pretty mixed between men and women?
It was mostly men, maybe an occasional woman there. But the women apparently at that time did not go out to the bars.
How about black and white? Was there a mixture there?
No, I don't think so because I don't remember ever seeing a black person in the gay bar or in any of the bars that I attended.
Did you know of any public figures, famous people that were gay, supposedly? Were in the gay community? You mentioned evidently a rather wealthy person in Detroit, out in Columbus, where they're wealthy.
Supposedly they were supposed to be one of the Wolf family, who owns the Dispatch. But Charles Wolf was supposed to be gay. I don't know. It was just talked about. Sometimes gay people have a habit of saying, wishing that famous people were gay, and you don't always know whether it's true or not. That was the only person that I heard of. Now I knew a dentist, a lesbian dentist that I went to, but none of the named people. Now they used to talk about, Oscar Wilde was the main thing.
Were there any other gay scandals of any sort?
I can't recall any. I know about that time, two guys lived in a rooming house up in the campus area. One was a little older, and I don't know whether it was a murder and suicide or double suicide or what. And I remember talking with my friends about it, and they said, well, that sounds like one of those guys. Those guys were queer. And I remember my response is, oh, I don't think so, because the one guy had a mother. And I don't know what that meant to me. And my friend, my straight couple then said, well, everybody has a mother, so I don't know what.
What words did you use to describe your sexual activities?
Well, of course, there was jacking off. And then there was cocksucking. And then if you took it in the rectum, we called that browning. And if you were a person that did that a lot, then you were known as a browning queen.
Would you describe yourself as a browning queen?
I guess I must have been. I know I had even composed that little the song at that time that I used to sing also at the parties about, I'm K.Y. Katie, the browning queen. I can take most any old thing, long or short, thick or thin. Just pull down my panties and stick it in. So.
Okay. Did you have any special costumes for your sexual activity?
No, was never into that. I don't know anybody was at that time. We just got our clothes off and of course, I said that song about being K.Y. Katie, but during the war, when you get these impromptu liaisons and end up at the hotel, you use spit, It worked.
Did you ever ask money for sex or pay money for sex?
I never asked it, and I never paid. And I think now, if I knew then what I know now, I think I'd have sold a little bit of it instead of giving it all away.
Did you know any prostitutes at all?
You mean male prostitutes?
Either way. Lesbian, gay, straight?
Well, I never knew any male prostitutes. Um, I think Miss Vicky, if she'd have had a chance, she would have sold it, because she didn't have a job. I was friends with I met some prostitute at a bar, and she asked me where I lived, and I said, well, I lived out at 42 Governor Place, and I said I was shared a room with Robert G. And she said, "Oh, do you know him?" Said he made me what I am today. Well, I thought, well, what is that really? She was also a beautician, by the way, and her name was Rosie, and she crops up later on with some friends of mine when I came home on leave when I was in nurses training. Oh, also across the hall was there were three prostitutes who lived across from Fran Stillman, and she had a party one night, and they came over, and I kissed one, and she said she almost threw me out of her apartment for kissing a woman. She thought that was the worst thing to do. Well, it was yucky.
You must have been drunk.
I was, probably.
Was there a lot
Or stoned on amphetamines. Now, in those days, you could get a Benzedrine inhaler because Benzedrine works on the mucous membrane, and it was very good for a stuffed up nose. Well, what we used to do was buy the inhalers and break them open, and there was this little piece of paper impregnated with amphetamine, and we would tear it up in little strips and roll it up in a ball and swallow it, and that's how we got high on amphetamines, Benzedrine. In fact, at one time they used to call me Aunt Benzedrina.
What other names did they have for you?
Well, someone, however, I don't know how he got at this name, but when I was flitting around one of the bars in my blue Canadian Air Force uniform, and someone said, "Oh, who is that?" And this guy, who later on became a friend of mine, spoke up and says, "Oh, that's Bernadette. She's gay as hell." So the name Bernadette kind of stuck with me.
Miss Bernadette.
Miss Bernadette. Well, now it's Miss Bernadette. In those days, it was just Bernadette. But now I've got this age on me, and what do you call it when you get old and sedate and something?
Dignified.
Dignified, yeah, dignity.
This next question is interesting. How has your sexual activity changed over the years?
Well, it's changed in that about 1959, I decided that my sexual life was not compatible with my religious values, so I stopped having gay sex, and later on was under vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, and I haven't had homosexual sex since 1959. So I guess that's a change.
Yeah.
But someone accused me. These people now that they talk about going out and tricking, and that's one thing we never did when I was a young gay. I never tricked. I had one night stands, but I never tricked. Well, where are we now?
You were talking about the friendship circle.
As I said, it wasn't tight as we are now. I had a couple friends. I had this Johnny M. that wasn't too well thought of. And then I had Fran Stillman, the female impersonator, and Vicky that lived at her apartment. And then the friends that lived out at Governor Place. And that was really the extent of the friendship circle. Now, there were a lot of gay people in Columbus that I knew to speak to, and maybe to go to bed occasionally with, but I wouldn't necessarily call them friends.
What did you call these people, sisters or just friends?
Well, we were sisters.
So you wouldn't have sex with each other?
No.
Did you have celebrations for like anniversaries and holidays and things like that?
Not especially, no. I can't remember.
Didn't you mention that?
Well, Fran Stillman had a 17th anniversary party when she and her lover had been together 17 years. And
did people think that was unusual for somebody to be together for 17 years?
Well, I don't know. She was older. I guess everyone thinks the ideal is, everyone says they want, a stable relationship. So I never thought one thing about it. I thought it just was there.
Well, I want to ask this other question about gay humor. Because you're known in our circle for being able to sing songs and tell jokes. What were some of the gay jokes that you can remember over the years?
Okay, now the ones that were popular during the war years, one was about the this little faggot went into the restaurant and ordered dinner. And after he was finished eating, the waiter came over and asked him if he wanted anything else. And he said, that pudding was awfully good. I think I'll have a second helping of the pudding. So the waiter yells back, come again on the pudding, Joe. And the little faggot says, oh, no wonder it was so good. And then during wartime, out on the West Coast, they had to hang out blackout curtains. And so these two lesbians were putting up their blackout curtains. And one was up on the ladder, and the other one was supposed to be holding the ladder. But she got to think about other things and wasn't paying attention, and the ladder collapsed, and both of them fell down, all wrapped up in these blackout curtains. And the one lesbian just started laughing. And the other one said, well, girl, what the hell are you laughing about? And she said, oh, this reminds me of the time we did the two nuns in the taxi cab. And then another one was the little fairy was going down the street, and he saw this crowd. And it turned out that some criminal had been choked to death by a detective. And so he asked somebody, he says, so what happened? They said, oh, the guy was choked by a big dick. He said, oh, what a wonderful way to go. And then this little faggot was going down the street, and he passed this prostitute, and he says, prostitute. And she looked at him, and she says, substitute.
Ooh.
And then, let's see. What are some of the others now you remember that I know about them?
The cow.
Well, this little fairy was trying to pick up this soldier in the bar. And the soldier said, no. He said, I don't want anything to do with you. He said, I've been overseas, and I want a woman. So he thought, well, he'd follow him and see how he did. And the soldier picked up this woman, and they went into the park and prepared to have sex. And all of a sudden he heard the soldier say, my God, you call that a cunt? I'd just as soon be screwing a cow. And the little fairy stuck his head through the bushes and said, moo, moo. Let's see, what else?
What about the sailor?
Well, this guy was trying to pick up this Marine, this butch Marine in the bar. And the bar said, no. I said, I don't want a faggot. So he watched him, and the Marine kept on drinking, getting drunker and getting drunker. And finally, when the Marine left, he went out in front of the bar, and he started getting ill. So he put his arm around the lamppost, and he started vomiting. And the little fairy come up, and he said, can I help you? He said, oh, God, girl, your mother's dying. And,
so these jokes are pretty much told to a gay crowd. You didn't hear straight people.
No.
People weren't telling these.
I think maybe the one on the pudding I heard from a straight person. And then another one in the gay crowd was this fairy was going down the street, and he saw his friend going on the other side of the street. Anyway, he saw, hi girl. And she just kept right on going, Well, he thought, well, she's not going to pass me by. So he crosses the street and comes up behind her and slaps her on the back and says, what the hell's the matter with you? You ain't speaking to me today. And she made a big gulp and said, oh, damn, you made me swallow a load I was taking to a sick friend. I think that's about it. And of course, I did the only song, gay song. There weren't any other gay songs.
What was that one where your sister's, Sister Kate? Isn't that a gay one?
Well, I made that up.
Well,
that was recently. But you've heard the song Sister Kate, and so I made this song. I wish I could do it like my sister Kate. She's out sucking cocks every night about 8. And all the boys in the neighborhood, they say that Kate, she sucks real good. She sucks them off and she swallows it down. She pedals her ass all over town. Oh, it would be just super great if I could do it like my sister Kate. Now Kate, she sucks them one by one, and sometimes she fucks just to have a little fun. But Kate, she ain't a-doing it for free, and like a good sister shares her money with me. But if I could help her, we could do much more. I might even let someone in my back door. Boom. Oh, I would hurry and I wouldn't be late if I could do it like my sister Kate. But is that a gay song or is that a heterosexual song? I never thought about that.
I don't know.
It goes about fucking. And but I think as long as we're on songs, I should do for posterity here, my ode to Anita Bryant. since she was one of our great supporters. And this song is my ode to Anita Bryant. If you ever go down Miami way, the situation is not very gay. Anita Bryant has cleaned up the town, and she don't want no faggots around. You can't live there, you can't teach school. Forget about the golden rule. If you're straight, then you belong. But if you're gay, then you're all wrong. If you're straight, then you're all right. Let's go beat up a faggot tonight. If one tries to make a pass, knock that Nelly Queen on her ass. Anita, Anita, save us from harm. Anyone different, we view with alarm. Oppress them now before it's too late. Do away with love, let's live with hate. So, I think that's about all the songs that we have.
What I'd like to do now is go back and maybe do a little more chronological at this point. Go back maybe to your high school.
Well, let's see. I went to high school.
Why don't you explain your mother died
Yeah.
when you were born, and then go from there, sort of and where you moved and what small town.
Okay, my mother died, and when I was 2 years old, well, after she died, then my father sold his house and bought a large old Victorian house, and he and my grandparents lived there, and then we had a nurse for the twins, and we had a cook. And my grandfather at that time was dying of cancer. So then when I was 2 years old, my father married again. My grandfather, meantime, had died, so my grandmother moved over into a piece of property that she had purchased, a double, so she could live on one side and rent out the other side. And my stepmother didn't like the old Victorian house that we lived in. She wanted a new house. So in 1930, my father bought her a new house on Kelton Avenue near Livingston in Columbus, Ohio. And that was a new section that was being opened up just then. It was called the Driving Park Addition. And the reason it was called the Driving Park was because Eddie Rickenbacker, who was a World War I flying ace, as you know, had a cinder racetrack in that area. And he used to race cars. And that was how it was called the Driving Park. And so we lived there until I was 10, and then my father died. But when my father died, then the arrangements were for my sister and I to live with my grandmother. So we got a duplex apartment near there so that I could stay in the same grade school. And we wanted to keep me in the same, didn't want me to have to change schools. So I lived with my grandmother for 2 years until she died. Well, then, by that time, my sister had gotten married, and my sister and my brother-in-law and I lived together. And after I graduated from the grade school, then we moved over to the house that my grandmother had left us near my junior high school. And I started Roosevelt Junior High School in Columbus, Ohio. Well, but I didn't know that my sister was complaining to my aunt, who by then was our guardian, that she just had a new husband and she didn't want to have a younger brother underfoot, So that summer, before my freshman year in high school, my uncle came to Columbus and drove me back to their home in Chevy Chase, Maryland. And I started high school in Chevy Chase, Maryland.
It was
1938.
That was stepping up in the world.
Well, it's all right. Nothing special. Let's see. Then in January of 39, my uncle, who was an Army officer, was sent to Fort Hays in Columbus, Ohio. So we moved at the school break, over Christmas, and we moved back to Columbus. And I think that was the year when we moved from the Washington, D.C. area that Eleanor Roosevelt resigned as president of the DAR because the DAR would not let Marian Anderson, a black woman, sing in Constitution Hall. So we moved back to Columbus, and we got an apartment in Upper Arlington while my aunt and uncle built a house. I didn't like my aunt. She had graduated from Columbus School for Girls in Columbus, Ohio, and I always say she never got over it. That's an exclusive girls' school here in Columbus. And I asked them then if I could go to Hebron, Ohio, a small town near Columbus, and live with my mother's people, her brother and his wife. And so we went out and asked them, and they were glad to have me. So I went out to Hebron, which is a little town, I'd say about 400 people, east of Columbus. Oh, in high school years, they called me Sissy Pants, although I didn't do anything. I don't know why. And when we'd go down to the bathroom in the school, there was these 2 rows of urinals with a little kind of a wall, shoulder-high wall between them. And if I'd be on one side and somebody'd be on the other, they'd say, Hal, guess what I got in my hand and I'll give you a bite. Well, I always guessed, but they never did give me a bite. And so I lived there, and that was where I really sucked my first cock. And I had been masturbating with a neighbor boy who was older than I was. And one day I asked him, I said, if you'll let me suck your cock if you won't tell anyone. And he said he wouldn't, but he did. And so after it was over, he said, you need to get a piece of ass. I was supposed to make a real man of me. And I stayed in this small town until graduation from high school. And the evening of graduation, my sister came to the graduation. I had my bags packed, and I left for Columbus that night. And then I went to Columbus, this would be May of 42, to attend office training school, which was a business college, appropriately enough, on Gay Street in Columbus, Ohio. And it was there that I would cruise around. At that time, I would cruise around the theaters. I think I mentioned the 3 theaters before. And we would just fool around in the theater. But I never really never got undressed and had sex with anyone in a bed.
Wasn't there an episode when you lived in Arlington with your aunt that you skipped school one day, did something?
Well, I did skip school, yes, and I was wandering around downtown, and this guy picked me up and took me to a hotel room and sucked my cock.
You would have been underage then.
Yes. And I just jacked him off. I didn't know why. I wasn't in the second cock set.
Did you have any guilt feelings about that?
No. Didn't see anything wrong with it. See, at that point, my church life was nil. My family never went to church.
But then you converted when you moved to Hebron.
Yeah.
To Catholicism.
To Catholicism.
And your family been a Protestant family.
Yeah. In fact, my aunt told me when I became a Catholic my senior year of high school, said, Bobby, your poor father's probably turning over in his grave. And I didn't realize that, the relationship between the Catholic Church and the Huguenots at that time. In fact, I didn't even know that my father was a Huguenot until my aunt was, well, I guess I did then, because it was when my aunt wanted to join the DAR that she did our genealogy background. And she was going to join the Colonial Dames, but she decided the DAR was socially a better class organization. So she found a relative that fought in the Revolutionary War, so she was able to join.
So you're going to business school,
and
cruising around the theaters, and then what happened?
And I went to business school about a year, thoroughly bored. And then I did a little manipulating with, say, I'm still underage, of course, and I did a little manipulating with finances, which I won't go in. It was my own money. And I took off for Canada. And I wanted to visit a pen pal in Canada. And while I was up there, I joined the Royal Canadian Air Force. I thought it was different. Well, they did have this pretty blue uniform. And I came back to Columbus on leave in my blue uniform, and that's where I was picked up. Well, I was picked up a couple times. I think Sergeant Louis was the first one, because I remember after he fucked me, he said, oh, I've got your cherry, when he came. After that, I picked up this other sergeant, and I think I picked him up in the Ionian room. And when we got up in the bedroom, and we were fooling around, he said, did you see that officer you were talking, or that guy, that captain you were talking to? And I said, yeah. He said, but he's queer. And I said, oh, he couldn't be. He's an officer. Well, I found out later that didn't make any difference, honey. But it was while I was in the Canadian Air Force. And then I went leave several times in Detroit. And there's where I went to Art Harris's bar in Detroit. And I was still innocent enough that this guy had picked me up and took me home for the night. And the next night we were in the bar with 2 friends of his. And the guy said, I was downstairs in the John last night. There were 2 soldiers doing a 69 on the floor. And I had to ask, what was a 69? I didn't know. So I really was kind of innocent. In fact, when I was even 21 years old and got the mumps, and I was working at the state hospital, and the doctor checked me out, and he said, "Did they go down on you?" And I thought, well, why is he asking me? He's a doctor. And I said, well, I don't know. Did they? And he said, well, you'd know more about that than I did. And I still didn't know what going down on meant. After a few months in the Canadian Air Force, I got kind of bored, so I came home to Columbus, and I didn't want to go back. And, well, I had this guy I had a crush on, and I was having a little love affair with, named Bob G. Bob D. So I asked the draft board, I said, what would happen if I don't go back? And they said, well, you're an American citizen. They can't make you, but we'll just draft you. And I said, okay, draft away. I'm not going back. Played around with Bob D. and we went to the bars, the Cabana Bar, quite a bit at that time. And in September of 44, then I was drafted into the American Army. Well, I took my basic training at Camp Joseph T. Robinson in Little Rock, Arkansas. But before, when I took my physical, the psychiatrist, you have to see the psychiatrist, and he said, did you ever do any cocksucking or any cornholing? And I said, no. And he wrote on the record, said effeminate, but denies homosexual activity. So I was inducted into the United States Army and sent to the infantry. And, that's no place for a queen in the infantry. It's rough. And I was sent to Camp Joseph T. Robinson in Little Rock, Arkansas for basic training. And I swear, when we camped out, I slept on every one of those damn rocks in Little Rock. And I would go into Little Rock on leave and occasionally pick up a soldier, and we'd have sex. But it wasn't that much. And just before I left there, I did sleep with the supply sergeant in the unit. At the end of the 4 months, I think that time it was 4 months basic training, I volunteered for the paratroopers. Now, I don't know what I thought I was doing, but I did. So from Little Rock, Arkansas, I was sent to the Alabama area of Fort Benning, Georgia. I don't think I ever did anything in Fort Benning, Georgia, but they kind of made cracks about me. They thought I was a faggot. A couple of guys in the tent did. One guy put a bottle of perfume on my bed one night while I was out. I washed out of the paratroopers because of my blood pressure, which I apparently inherited from my father, and was sent on leave. And after that, sent on leave, that was the end of 44. No, the beginning of 45. That was January of 45. And while I was in Columbus on leave, I had this friend that I had met, this woman that hung around the bars, and she seemed to know the gay people. And she and I decided we were going to get married. Well, I thought it was a good cover-up. And I said, as long as you understand, that we're just married and there's nothing else there. And she said, well, I don't care how many men you go out with as long as you don't fool around with any other women. So we were going to get married, and I got drunk and lost the license. And the next day, January the 5th, I think it was, we went back up to the courthouse and got a duplicate license and got married right there. And then from then I went back to camp at Fort George Meade, Maryland.
Now, was this marriage consummated?
Oh, the marriage was never consummated. We slept together, but she stayed on her side of the bed and I stayed on mine, honey. In fact, I had a date to my wedding night,
With a man?
Yes, of course. And
where did she spend her wedding night?
Well, she spent it alone in bed, I guess, unless she had a boyfriend there with her. I don't know. So anyway, I'm sent to Fort George Meade, Maryland, and I'm having a little training there. And I thought, now, I was having an affair with some guy there in the camp, and I knew we was going to get separated. I thought, now, this is just for the birds. So I went to the priest, and I said, Father, I found that being in camp with all these men, that I'm sexually attracted to them, and it's really bothering me, and I can't keep from committing sin. So he said, well, you go see Captain White in such and such a building. Well, the next day I went to see Captain White, and in front of the building was this sign, Neuropsychiatric Institute. Well, I didn't know what the hell that meant. So I went in, and I first had to talk to the captain's secretary or clerk or whatever it was, and I told him everything. And so then he told the captain everything, and then they informed me that I would have a court-martial and would be dismissed from the Army.
Did they want names of other people?
No, they didn't.
Because nowadays they look through your diaries, they look through your letters and everything.
When I was discharged from the Army at Fort Meade, I said I hung around Washington for a couple of days, and I was picked up by this lieutenant, and he took me to a home in Alexandria, Virginia. And it looked like there was an old man living there that looked like he was hardly getting by financially. And I kind of think that he rented out the rooms maybe to discreet people that didn't want any record of where they'd been for the night. But when I came down the next day in his living room, he pointed out, or maybe the lieutenant pointed out, that lying on the coffee table was the Green Book, Carolyn Hager-Shaw's book of Who's Who in Washington Society. So there, this person that didn't seem to have any money must have come from a good family, because he was listed, they pointed out to me that he was listed in the Green Book. 47, let's see, I've covered Governor Place, and still the bar is the Cabana in Columbus, and I was working in a private psychiatric hospital. Okay, well, there are two events in Columbus during this period of time between 46 and January 48 that need to be mentioned. At one time, I was living in this flea-bag motel on Long Street. I think it cost $2 a night, and I had been out cruising. And I came home drunk, loaded, and I must have camped it up with the porter, who was having a crap game in the elevator when I went to go up to my room. But anyway, I went up to my room, and I was fooling around, and I put on this black dress for some reason or other. It was black velvet with a little ruffle at the skirt, a little ruffle around the top. And then I noticed that my key to my room was missing. So I didn't know what was going on, and for some reason or other, I put my coat on over it and went to the shower, but the shower wasn't in the room. And as I went to the shower, I took the dress off and dropped it down the air shaft. And I took the shower and came back to my room, and there's these two cops and the porter. And they talked to me, and they looked through my stuff, and they found I had some fingernail polish, and they said, well, is that part of your work? And I said, oh, yes. And because they knew I said I was going to student at beauty school, Capital School, beauty culture. And so they kept on talking. And I said, well, now, what's going on here? Am I charged with something? And they said, no. The hotel people just want you out. We're going to escort you out the door. And he said, what makes people queer? And I said, well, I don't know. But the idea that I like was Freud's theory of fixation of the libido at the homosexual stage. And I went on saying what I knew about that. And so when they were escorting me out the door of the hotel, this one cop says, well, Howell said, I've talked to a lot of queers, but you're the most sensible one I've ever talked to. So then there's another episode in Columbus that I should mention, I guess. When I was hanging around my friend, Fran Stillman, the female impersonator, she used to work in carnivals, and she had this friend that came to see her named Billy M. And he had been in Carney with her, and he was getting involved in the spiritualist woman, and he got ordained in the spiritualist church and became the first pastor in the 6th Street Temple in Columbus, Ohio. It was on 6th and State. And I had a crush on him. And I used to stay up at the rectory, and I'd clean the rectory and keep house and do everything. I even took up the collection at the church services. And we had this friend of ours, this gay friend of ours, that owned a funeral parlor in Columbus. And one day my minister friend wanted to preach on life after death. So we borrowed a casket from this funeral parlor friend. And at appropriate time in his sermon, I got up and closed the lid of the casket and carted it on out down the aisle. And that went on for a few months until there got to be some talk, as I found out later, about me being there with him, and he had to break it up. So, do I have to go into how he broke it up?
Oh, I think that's one of the story.
Oh, well, see, I knew he'd come in Carney, and I don't know whether the spiritualist movement is true or not. I've had some good spiritualist people that, but I thought he was faking it. And so he kept telling me he wanted me to come to one of his trumpet seances. Well, these people in the trumpet circle paid $2 or $3, to attend that each night. And there I am, and the trumpet tells them that they can't communicate with anyone because there's poor vibrations, because there's somebody in the room that doesn't believe. And I'm truthful if I'm nothing else. And I'm brutally frank. And so the trumpet came over and said, "Bob, you don't believe in this, do you?" And I said, "No, I don't." So, of course, when the lights went on, nobody's speaking to me, and I just got the hell out of there, and that was the end of my affair with the spiritualist minister. And later on, he founded a church down on the up in the campus area, but he's dead now. So I think that brings me to January of 48, when I entered nurses training at Florida State Hospital School of Nursing in Chattahoochee, Florida.
Okay, now we're going to start again. This is November 8th, and we're sitting around the table here in the kitchen, and I'm making cookies, and so there may be some cooking noise going on, but we were just getting ready to go to Chattahoochee.
Yeah. Okay, well, I want to go to nursing, and at that time there were very few nursing schools in the United States that would admit men, and in fact, in the state of Ohio, there were only two, and they were both in a Catholic hospital. So I got this list of schools that admit men, and one of them was Florida State Hospital in Chattahoochee, Florida. Well, I wanted to train in a state hospital because psychiatric nursing was the area of nursing which interested me. And also, to me, Florida meant Miami Beach. I thought Florida was just one big Miami Beach. And I didn't know about this little panhandle up there next to Alabama and Georgia, pure cracker country. So I left Columbus on the, it was after New Year's Day, maybe it was on New Year's Day, 1948, and I was supposed to arrive in Chattahoochee on a Sunday morning, I think. But I had to change buses at Louisville, Kentucky, and I went over to the bar for a drink, and someone picked me up, and I got in bed, and I missed my bus.
That was definitely a layover.
So then I sent a telegram that I would be late, and I took the next bus, and I arrived Sunday evening. Well, classes started on Monday morning. And at that time, there were two men in the class, another one and myself. And we were the first men to go to that school of nursing. Now, here I am, the first man in an all-girls school. I'm coming from Columbus, Ohio, so I'm a damn Yankee. And I'm the only Catholic in the town of Southern Baptist. But I survived. Well, the first week I was in training, I met the supervisor of the white male department. And he took me to bed. Well, I didn't know that he already had a lover, and he was playing around on the side. And the lover came into his bedroom one morning, and I really was asleep. He thought I was pretending, and said if he didn't stop messing around, he was going to shoot us. So that was the end of that. And my next...
was his lover working there also?
I don't remember where he did. Worked at the hospital, or whether he worked in town. So my next playmate was the hospital postmaster. And honey, he had a big dick too. So he and I played around a few times. And go back to, you probably are wondering what I'm talking about when I say white male. You see, in 48, things were pretty well segregated in Florida. And this was a 5,000-bed state hospital that was divided into the chronic wards, the white male, the white female, the colored male, and the colored female, and then the hospital proper, which comprised 50 beds, which is the lab area for the school of nursing. Well, second week of training, we had a class in Professional Adjustments 1, which teaches young student nurse how to act properly as a student nurse. And the director of the school was saying that now there are 3 places where the students shouldn't go. One of them is Bob's, which was a bar across the Georgia line. Nothing wrong with it. And she said the other one is Yates, and that was a hotbed motel where you rented by the hour. And she said the third one is, and she says, what is that third one now? And I spoke up and said, Peacocks. And she said, yes, Peacocks. And then she looked at me and said, well, how do you know? Because I'd only been in town, a couple of weeks. But I'd been to all 3 of them already. And actually, there was nothing wrong with Peacocks. In those days, they'd put up these little shacks and put a jukebox in and get a beer license. And when you went around to those different places, up in the Panhandle of Florida, they called it gone jukin'. And so we had gone jukin' one night, and I'd been to all of them. Well, let's see, nothing really, no problems.
Didn't feel you were discriminated against for being gay or for being male?
Well, they really didn't know I was gay. They just assumed I was. But I didn't mess around that much in Chattahoochee. When I wanted to play around, I got out of town, got on the bus, and went to Tallahassee or Jacksonville. Mm-hmm. So there wasn't anyone really outside of these two people that weren't going to talk that could say anything about me. Now, the guy that ran the white male department used to play the records that supplied music all over. That looks awful moist.
Yeah, it's they melted the butter.
Oh, played music all over the hospital, and he'd play my favorite tunes, and then announce there that said he's playing this tune or that tune for all those pretty student nurses out there. Well, I knew who he meant me, honey. And so the first year went by kind of uneventful. Now, in September 1948, they started the re-registration of drafters of the Selective Service, after the war. And I thought, now I have no business registering down there in a Yankee registering down there in the South. I thought I better get back to Ohio and register. Well, of course, I knew that they wouldn't take me anyway, but no one else knew that they would take me because I was going to school under the GI Bill there at the hospital. So I got
even though you had a blue discharge, you got a GI Bill. That's so strange.
And I came back to Columbus on vacation, and I visited all the bars, and I stayed with this couple that I was buddies with at the Columbus State Hospital. And they, in the meantime, got married. And they had an apartment down there around Mountain High, too, where Fran Stillman used to have hers. And they were telling me about this prostitute that lived upstairs, and she used to throw men out of her apartment all hours of the night. So later on that day I was there, Laverne, that was my female friend of mine, was standing in the kitchen door, and she said, "Bob, come here." I said, "Rosie's coming down from upstairs." Well, Rosie clomped down and comes down the hall, and she takes a look at me, and here is Rosie that I had met in the bar years ago. And she wanted to know how I was and all that. So after I went back to Florida, she went and saw my friends, and she says, "Now let me know when he's coming back again. So I want to have a party for him." And I thought, well, now that's good. A prostitute want to have a party for me. So I went back to my nursing school, and nothing eventful happened. I used to, as I said, when I wanted to do any drinking, I'd take the bus and go to Tallahassee. Now, there weren't any gay bars in Tallahassee at that time, but there were certain bars where you could pick up someone. And I did occasionally meet someone and ended up in bed. Well, the second year, 1949, my second year of nursing dawned. And, I forgot to mention that the first guy that went in training with me, after about a month or so, he started having epileptic seizures. They found out he was epileptic, and they kicked him out. So I was the lone man for all of that year. Well, toward the end of the year, they started another class, and another guy came in. And he and I were roommates. Well, after about 4 or 5 months of training, he got kicked out because he kept propositioning people around the hospital, and they complained. And the men. And the medical director told the director of the school that he had to go because he was homosexual. So she called me in. She said, "Now, Dr. Rogers says that Mr. S. is homosexual." And she said, "I don't think he is." I said, "Do you know anything about it?" And I said, "Well, the only thing I can say is, Mrs. Young, he never made any advances toward me." Well, of course he didn't because we were sisters, honey. But that was enough for her, and she transferred him to St. Elizabeth's Hospital in Covington, Kentucky, and he graduated from there. Well, but this time it's the middle of the year. It's the end of May, and the girls in my class are ready to go on affiliation. we had to go and spend 9 months at a non-psychiatric hospital as part of our 3 years training. Well, the girls are all going to Charity Hospital in New Orleans, but they won't take men. So I have to go to Bellevue Hospital in New York City. And I arrived there the last day of May, ready to start my affiliation on June the 1st. Well, that time, the men nurses home, whether you know, it's actually a separate school of nursing. It's called Mills School of Nursing. The men aren't graduates of Bellevue School of Nursing. It's Mills School. And the little house that had been endowed for them, I guess, was no longer habitable. And the male nurses' home was on the 6th floor of the TB hospital, TB building. And at that time, I don't know, I understand, I think Bellevue has been rebuilt now and is built straight up, but at that time it stretched from 26th Street down to 30th on First Avenue. And there were different buildings like the surgical building, the medical building, and anyway, the TB building had the men nurses home. And there were about 150 male student nurses there. Not only from Bellevue, but quite a few schools sent them there for affiliation. All of the state hospitals in New York State sent them there for a year. Well, the first day I arrived there, I met someone, and that night I was in his bed getting screwed. And it was like that for the rest of the affiliation. When you wanted something, you didn't need to really go out to the nurse's home to get it. It was right there. But occasionally we did go out, and we used to do what we called the bird circuit. And that was the golden pheasant and the blue parrot. And I thought there was a third one, but I can't remember. The person that broke my heart, though, when there was this L guy, and he was a redheaded Jewish boy that lived next door to me, and his wife was in training at Kings County Hospital, and I had no business fooling around with him anyway because I knew I was only going to be there for 9 months, and I knew he was married, but I did. And one of the places that he took me was, I think, the Cafe Nino. It runs in my mind, it was around 58th and 8th Avenue, and it was there that the records of Edith Piaf were popular, and that's where I first heard her sing La Vie en Rose. And I've been in love with Edith Piaf's music ever since. Well, we didn't have much money as a student nurse, and one of the things we did for recreation was to go down to Union Square and listen to the communist speeches. And this one guy, I remember, got up to speak, and he had a little American flag there, and he said, we used to speak at Columbus Circle, and so we can't speak at Columbus Circle anymore because Cardinal Spellman ran us out of there. And the reason he ran us out of there is because he wants to build a big gambling casino place for their bingo games at Columbus Circle. And he said, they need those bingo games to make money for their orphanages, and I guess they do. But he said, if those priests wore their pants turned around like they do their collar, I don't think they need as many orphanages. Well, that was, sometimes you could pick up someone at these speeches, but I...
Really? Was it a cruisy place?
Yeah, occasionally. But I really didn't, well, it really wasn't necessary to go cruising out on the street, because... And it was safer back at the hospital.
Well, did you ever hear of anybody getting caught in a vice squad or anything?
No, And while I was there, also, I had to take an affiliation for 2 months down at Willard Parker Hospital, which used to be down around Avenue D. It was downtown from Bellevue. It's not there anymore. But on the day of orientation, when all the students hit there, and there were a lot of students because it was the only, I think, contagious disease hospital in Manhattan, and all the schools sent their students there for contagious disease affiliation. And they would show us around the hospital, and they would always point to a plaque that showed where Ethel Barrymore had scarlet fever. And that was their claim to fame, was that Ethel Barrymore had scarlet fever in their hospital. Well, nothing eventful happened there. And I came back to Bellevue and finished my affiliation. I think that's about all about New York that I think you can think of.
Let's see, you didn't go to Sloan House.
I didn't go to Sloan House, no. Till later, I'll cover that.
What were the accommodations like back in Chattahoochee, as compared to, you didn't really mention the comparison of these?
Oh, well, I'll tell you, well, let's see, might as well go back to Chattahoochee then. And then in March or April of my senior year, that would be 1949, I went back to Chattahoochee to finish my training. Well, the women stayed in the nurses' home. Now, this is discrimination. The women stayed in the nurses' home, and they had their uniforms furnished. The administration didn't really want men students. It was the director of the school that was pushing it, and they would not furnish uniforms for the male students. We had to buy our own, and the only accommodations they would give us was in the attendants' dormitory, which had rooms that had about 12 or 15 beds in them, and it's not too conducive to studying, you know. So we almost all had to live off of the campus in private homes in the community and pay our own rent. And I guess the rest of my training was uneventful. I think that year I did get to Jacksonville, Florida, for a weekend of fun and games. And the only bar I can remember going there was the bar in the Hotel Mayflower, which I think was a big old hotel built like a ship. And it was quite gay. And I think I had a sexual liaison there. And some park, I remember cruising some park where I picked up someone too. I don't know.
Jacksonville?
Yeah. And
were there more men back at Chattahoochee when you came back?
Yeah, by the time I came back from affiliation, there were about 4 more new male students. Let's see.
And they were all gay?
No. Let's see. One was married. His wife was a nurse there, came there to work. The other one said he wasn't gay, and I don't know. I didn't find out. Then there were 2 brothers that were there, and they were supposed to be straight, but I slept with one of them. Used to do him. He was just trade, as they say. And I really didn't fool around that much in towns. One of the doctors tried to get me to go for a ride with him, and I wouldn't go. And
was this the time when you knew somebody that got married later? And you were in a car?
No, I'll tell you.
I'm remembering bits and pieces of things you're talking
about. But the dentist, one of the dentists that was there, was gay, but I didn't know it, but he was fooling around with one of the attendants that I knew was gay, but I was so naive, I didn't know what was going on anyway. But to get back to my postmaster buddy that I had slept with my first week of school, or second, in the meantime had gotten married. Well, his wife wanted to have a birthday party for him that year. And maybe this was earlier, but I didn't have any money. And the night I went to the party, I was strung out on Benzedrine. And I took a bottle of alcohol from the operating room. And my roommate said that they were afraid to light cigarettes around me with my breath because I was drinking practically straight alcohol. Well, after the party, we all went out someplace to go dancing. And we're in the back of the car, me and my buddy and his wife, and I'm groping him, and she finds out about it. And as they say, the shit hit the fan. Oh, got divorced. But the funny thing about it is she still remained my friend even though she divorced him. I don't understand that. But finally, December the 8th came, 1950, and we had our graduation. And had our graduation dance. And I escorted a woman, of course. And that was more or less the end of training.
Did you get a little cap?
No, well, you see, you get your cap when you're 6 months at the end of the clinical period. All we got was a pen and diploma then. After I graduated, then I was given supervision of the male electric and insulin shock ward. and it's just what it says. It was for male patients, and we treated them with insulin shock therapy and electric shock therapy. And we never had anyone come in to be cured of homosexuality. We did have one young kid that came because he was having problems. He was having nocturnal emissions, and the doctor told him if he would masturbate a couple times a week, then he would have them. And he thought it was sapping his strength. And he said no, he couldn't do that because he was a Baptist, and that was a sin. And we had another guy.
So he's having electric shock because of wet dreams?
Well, he might not have been having electric shock. It might have been just psychotherapy.
Oh, that's pretty.
Well, it wasn't wet dreams. It was because they were upsetting him. He was neurotic.
Still, I mean, burn your brain out so you don't have wet dreams.
And the other guy we had up there was latent homosexual, and he was having, I think he was paranoid. I said to the psychiatrist, I said, isn't he paranoid because he hasn't accepted it? That if he would accept himself as a homosexual and act accordingly, then he wouldn't be ill. And he said, yeah, that's right. But I think the guy did, because he came back after he was discharged from the hospital and tried to get in my drawers, which he did, of course. And I worked there until September of 1951, nothing eventful happening. Still going for weekends for drinking bouts at Tallahassee and Jacksonville. No different bars. Although the bar that I did frequent was closed, and the guy's son had one now. It was called the Oasis. And it seemed to be a friendly bar. Young crowd. At the end of August, I gave up my job in Chattahoochee to return to Columbus, Ohio, because I wanted to enter Ohio State University, and I had to do that before working a year. Going to Florida to school did not lose my residency, but working 12 months after I graduated in Florida would lose my status as an Ohio resident, and I didn't want to pay out-of-state fees. So the end of August, I gave up my job and moved back to Columbus. And I started a program in Ohio State University in the College of Education to get a degree to teach psychiatric nursing. And at that time, they would take male nurses who had already graduated from training into the HC. I was in the College of Education, but they would still not admit men to the School of Nursing. And I worked 2 days at...
Did they have a reason for that? That they wouldn't take men? I mean, was there some rational reason for it?
I guess because it was a woman's... They'd always had women, and that was a women's job. That wasn't a man's job.
Did they let women be doctors?
I think there were some, but I don't think... I think they had a hard time. I don't know where they were that. And...
well, certainly in the Army and stuff, they must have had males that were nurses, didn't they?
Well, there weren't that many nurses, and I think some of them that went in when I was in the Army were in as sergeants. They weren't commissioned. See, even at this period of time, they had a school of anesthesiology for nurses. St. Francis was, I said it was one of the hospitals that would take you in off the streets. And it was one of the 2 schools in Ohio that had male students. So there were male students that in their school of nursing. And several of them were gay, and I went to bed with one of them, 2 of them maybe. I started there working on the floor, and I started in February of 52, I guess this was now. And I left there in September of 54. Now, the first time I worked there, I worked on the 4th floor. And then I left there and went down to Rome, Georgia, right in Cracker Country, and worked there as a supervisor at Batty State Hospital. And I got strung out after a couple months on Demerol. So I left there and came back to Columbus and went back to St. Francis Hospital. And this time I went to the operating room. Well, there was a staff doctor there that was gay. In fact, he was the one that had given me my physical before I went to training, but he didn't remember it. and I had seen him at the bars. And he used to get me in the see me in the dressing room and show me dirty pictures. And I would just look at him and say, oh, doctor, like a damn simp. I don't know what I thought was what I was doing. And also there was a resident there that I learned later that was gay, but I didn't know about at the time, but he was cute. I liked him. And so I worked there until 1954, September, when I got strung out again on Demerol. And this time I got busted for making a false entry on a narcotic record. So I had to go through the court, and the court sentenced me to 2 years at the United States Public Health Services Hospital in Lexington, Kentucky. And that was known as Narco. And I believe at that time there were 2 of them in the country, one at Lexington and one in Fort Worth, Texas. And I guess depending on which area of the country you came from, determined which one you were to go to. So I was sent to Lexington, Kentucky.
Before we go on there, what bars were in Columbus at that time, just before you went to Lexington?
Okay, it was still just the Blue Feather.
Really?
Was there. Uh-huh. The INA room had kind of straightened out since the war was over. And sometimes a little few at the Oasis, but not many. But the only gay bar there was still the Blue Feather.
What about your old social crowd? Was it still around?
It had dispersed, and the man that owned the house at their Governor Place, was moving over on Woodland Avenue. And I don't think he had gay people living in his house at that time. I know he called me, and he says, "You scared me." I said, "What are you talking about?" He said, "Well, this big black car drove up to the house, and out comes Father something, McGann or something or other." See, when I was working at St. Francis Hospital, I saw this chaplain, and he told me that he lived at St. Francis, was chaplain there, but he also worked at the Chancery office, and he was in charge of the marriage tribunal. And I said, "Oh, you probably got me in your record." I said, "I went through there when I got my divorce." So he came back and said, "Well, yours was never finalized because you didn't have all your witnesses there. One of your witnesses didn't testify." And I said, "Well, you tell me who testified then, and I can tell you who didn't." Well, he named 2 names, and I said, "Well, the third one then has to be Albert Huffman." And he looked at me kind of strange. He said, "Do you know him?" And I said, "Yeah, I used to live in his house." He said, "Well, he used to be the cook for the bishop when they were remodeling the bishop's residence, and the bishop lived out in Bexley." So that's what Albert meant when he called him. This priest drove up to his big black car, Cadillac, I don't know what it was, and got his deposition. So then they gave me a statement from the Catholic Church saying that I was never married because of the form, being a justice of peace. So I called that getting my virginity papers, which I never lost in the first place there. Okay, now I'm getting ready to go to Lexington, and I go by way of the Cincinnati jail. I have to have a stay over there one night, and then the next day I arrive at Lexington, Kentucky. Well, I didn't have to go through the withdrawal ward because I had already withdrawn. So I went on the ward, and what can I say is when a queen goes into the midst of all those guys that are shut off, it was heaven on earth. Except it got to be too much of a good thing. They were pestering you all the time. And I had the guards on my tail because, they thought I was having too much fun. Finally, they kept moving me around. And I had enough of it. So I went to see the psychiatrist and said, "I just can't stand this. All these people just bugging me for sex all the time." So they transferred me over to the psychiatric building, which was separate. It was called Cobb Hall. And over there, they had psychiatric patients that were, some addicts, but mainly it was merchant seamen who receive their medical care apparently from the public health system, and they were sent there for psychiatric purposes. And also they had some addicts there that were called informers that were not safe in the general population, so they were isolated over there. And while I was there, I became the secretary for the nursing supervisor of that building. And I was a good secretary, and being a nurse, I could do a lot of detail thinking for her. So they liked that. So I got to stay there the rest of my time over there. And I really didn't engage in sex then. I just had enough of it. I know I had the patients trying to get me in bed, some of the male help trying to get me in bed, and I was just resisting it all.
Now, most people's conception of the prison situation is a lot of forcible rape, unpleasant situations. So you're saying that yours was not like that?
Okay, because these were not, first of all, they weren't all prisoners. Some people were there voluntarily. You could sign yourself in there.
Oh, to get right out.
It was a hospital.
Oh.
And so the prisoners that were there were also addicts.
Mm-hmm.
So it was all a certain type of personality.
Mm-hmm.
And
so these weren't hardened criminals.
No. So
did you have to end up having somebody to sort of protect you?
I did take up with someone just because, as long as they know you have someone, the rest of them will leave you alone then. But then when I got over to Cobb Hall, I didn't have to because I wasn't engaged in, and it was a small unit. I'd say there are more, maybe 100 people in the whole building. And so I stayed there until April of 56 when I was discharged. And I came home to Columbus, to my sister's house outside Columbus.
How did your family react to you being busted?
Well, my stepmother never told her husband. My sister and my brother-in-law just never discussed it, just as they never discussed my being gay.
Just looked done?
I guess. Have to wait till it cools and cut it, I guess.
Do we put powdered sugar on these?
If you want to.
Does Jeff do that?
I don't know. I can't remember. So anyway, I spent the summer that summer at my sister's, and my stepmother gave me money then I looked into lab technician schools, and I thought I couldn't go back into nursing, and I thought, well, with my nursing background, maybe a lab technician school would be sufficient. Commercial school would be rather than the 4-year program. So there was one in New York City, and October of 56, I took myself to New York City to attend Manhattan Medical and Dental Assistant School at Broadway in 58. And incidentally, this is the same lab technician school that Christine Jorgensen attended before she had her transsexual operation. And I went to the school that morning, and they were supposed to refer me to someplace to live, and they referred me to the YMCA on 34th, which was called Sloan House. And I had heard before was also called the French Embassy. And, John Ritchie talks about the showers running all night long in there and people meeting them. Well, they did, and it was that way. And I didn't have that much sex, though. I didn't fool around that much. While I was there, I attended in the morning, I attended the lab technician school. And then in the afternoon and early evening, I worked at Francis Scherbier Home and Hospital up in the Riverdale section of the Bronx. And there were a couple gay guys working there that I used to go over to they lived there. And I went over to their room and we had sex occasionally. But I didn't have that much. And I didn't run around because I was interested in studying and learning. And between that and working, I didn't do too much in New York City at that time. I can't think of anything special in New York. I don't even know I never went to a gay bar, I don't think, during that period.
What year was this again?
This would have been from October of 56 to March of 57.
Was there any kind of gay protesting going on at all, if you remember, in the press or anything?
No. In March of 57, I got on the Cincinnati Limited and took a train to Cincinnati. I was to work, in fact, this hospital I worked at, Francis Scherbier Home and Hospital, was operated by the same nuns that I worked for at St. Francis, operated St. Francis in Columbus, Ohio. And the nun that I worked for in Columbus was now administrator of St. Francis in Cincinnati, and she wanted me to work in her lab when I finished.
She had no problem with the fact that you'd been busted. Yeah,
She also knew I was gay too.
And You had lost your nursing license for sure.
Yeah. Well, it was suspended. It wasn't.
It was suspended.
Yeah, it was suspended. It wasn't revoked.
That judge was pretty fair then.
Well, he didn't do that. It was the board that did that.
Oh.
The board, I think they wanted to be fair. They suspended. But also, I forgot to mention about this guy that came from. I don't know whether that's a gay story or not, but when I was at St. Francis, they had this man came from California, and he apparently was passing as an RN. And the state board had called Sister Teresa at St. Francis and said if he applies there for a job, hire him. So she did, and she put him in the operating room because scrubbing and surgery, you very little harm you can do, and it was found in the during the war that you didn't even have to be a nurse to scrub in surgery. That scrub technicians can be trained to do as much as a nurse because there isn't any independent thinking there. And he was hired in surgery, and I was working in surgery, and she asked him, I lived across the street at the KFC club because of taking call at night, and she asked me to go over and get him a room at the KFC club. And I went over, and they said, well, they wouldn't have a room till the end of the week, but they could put a cot in my room for him. And I thought, well, the hospital knows him. They hired him. They must have investigated him. So I said, okay. Well, he stayed there about a week, and that weekend I went out to my sister's. And when I came back on Monday morning, he was gone. So I was working a shift from 11 in the morning till 7 at night and getting ready for work at 11 o'clock. I put my uniform on, and I noticed my nursing pin was gone. So when I went to work, I was in the lobby of the hospital, and I passed the director of nursing, Sister Teresa, and I said, I've lost my pin. And I went on up to work, and a couple hours later, she calls up. She says, Mr. Howell, where is your nurse's, there's a little blue card that you were issued by the State Board of Nursing that's showing you were a registered nurse. She said, where's your nurse's registration card? I said, what's over my room in my billfold? I said, I never use it except on paydays when I use an ID to cash my check. She said, well, would you go over and get it for me? So I went over, got my billfold out, and it wasn't there. Well, I came back and I said, Sister, it's not there. So then she told me the story about she had a call from the state board, and the state board said, is Mr. Howell still working at St. Francis Hospital? And she said, yes, he is. They said, are you sure? She said, well, I just saw him 2 hours ago. They said, well, someone has applied for a job in a Toledo hospital using the name Robert Howell, and they have his nursing pin and his blue registration card from the state board. So the next day, the state board people came out to see me and had me write a statement that it was taken from my room. And they told this hospital in Toledo to go ahead and hire him and let him sign his name as Robert Howell, RN. Then they'd have him.
Yeah.
So that was that episode. Okay. So that director of nursing then, Sister Teresa, was now administrator of St. Francis Hospital in Cincinnati, and she wanted me to work in her lab. She had problems in the lab, and so she wanted me to work there. So I went there and worked as a lab technician at St. Francis Hospital in Cincinnati. Now, I didn't go out much. There happened to be a lesbian there that I became friends with. And because I didn't go to the bars, she took me out one night to the bars. We went once to the women's bar, which was called Jim's, and that was a trip. We left there twice, once because there was a wreck out front. We thought the police were going to come for that. And then we came back, and then the bartender fired off a shot at somebody else. So we left
with a gun.
Yeah, with a gun.
Oh my God.
So all these faggots in the back room. See, the faggots were in the back room. The bar, I guess, up front was straight. So all the faggots hit the floor when the gun goes off, and then we all take off again because we figured the police are going to come. And we cruise around, and we finally come back, and our drinks are sitting right there on the table where we left them. So we finished them, and then we went to the men's bar. And, of course, it was refined, as we all are. And I don't even remember the name of it.
Remember where it was?
It reminds me the street was Walnut, but I don't know whether that was it or not. But there was only one, I guess.
It was downtown, though.
Yeah. And That was the only time I went to the bar in that Cincinnati. But this friend of mine was the lesbian friend of mine. As I said, we're buddies, and so that a lot of times she and I would go out to visit her friends who were lesbians, so that I knew more lesbians in Cincinnati at that period than I did straight people.
Didn't you get in some trouble over in Covington or something?
No.
Was there a bar you had to get escorted out by the police?
Oh, that goes back. I forgot. I was just thinking about that. That was when. That was back when I was living at Governor Place, and Fran Stillman, this friend of mine, female impersonator, was playing at the House of Rink there on the Parkway
Down
in Cincinnati.
Oh.
And I went down there for the weekend, and she was playing there, and several of us were in there drinking, and the dirt started to gather, and the word was that they were going to get us when the bar closed. So somebody called the police. And the police made everyone stay in the bar while they escorted us out to the car, and we went on our way. And so nothing happened. But
So that was what year?
that would have been in, before 48.
And the police knew you were gay?
Yeah.
And they were escorting you?
Yeah, they escorted us out of the bar.
That's
So
really
to
good.
protect us.
That's great.
Yeah. And so now, see, when I backtrack like that, then I forget where I am. Tell me where I was.
Well, you were in Cincinnati again.
I'm still in Cincinnati. What I said as I listened to that back, I said I had more lesbian friends than straight friends, and what I meant is I had more lesbian friends than gay men. Nothing eventful happened while I was working there at St. Francis. We did have a doctor there that tried to get me in bed. Of course, I resisted because I don't fool around where I work. And I had an apartment at that time, and one of the former students at St. Francis was teaching a class, course to firemen in Cincinnati, and he came down and got in touch with me and came over that night. Well, I had sex with him, several times when he was a student, and now he had graduated and was married with kids, and I never expected anything to happen, but he came over to the house, and we had a glass of wine and talked over old times. And when he got up to leave, he grabbed me and kissed me. Well, from then on, I was just putty in his hands, And so we went to bed. And the next day, I thought about it, and I thought, here I am going to bed with a married man. And it's wrong anyway. And I thought about my religious values and the gay life and decided they weren't compatible. So at that point, I decided to give up gay sex. So wasn't going to change me. Of course, I was still gay, but I didn't have to have sex. So that takes me up till...
And you never, ever had sex again after that?
Never. And that takes me up to November of 59. And I was working as a lab technician, and I was the oldest one in the seniority there, oldest too. And I was getting all the emergency calls when they have a night, when they need someone to show up for night work, and I'd have to cover that evening. And I was trying to go to school at Xavier, night school, and it got to be a bit much. So about that time, the Sister Teresa, in the meantime, had been transferred over to St. Elizabeth's in Covington. And she was the administrator there, and she wanted to open a personnel office. So she asked me to come over to St. Elizabeth's in Covington, and she hired someone that knew about personnel work. And she hired me then to be his assistant because I knew hospital work. And she figured between the two of us, we could organize a personnel department, which we did. And I was assistant personnel director there for 5 years. And at that time, I wasn't living a gay life. I was aware of a nightclub over in Covington, Kentucky, called the Jacobo Club. And I never went there until about my last year. I was working there. This lesbian friend of mine came over from Cincinnati, and I had a few drinks of vodka, and I said, oh, well, let's go. So I went there one time. And at that time, I don't know what gay bars were in Cincinnati, but this was in Covington and was called the Jacobo Club. And I worked there in St. Elizabeth Hospital until March of 1963. And I was kind of bored with my job. We had everything going. And in the meantime, Sister Teresa had been sent to the Margaret Murray Hospital in Batesville, Indiana. So she invited me to come to work at Batesville and start a personnel department there. So I left St. Elizabeth and moved to Batesville, Indiana, which is a small town. Has quite a bit of industry. It has the Hillenbrand Industries and it has Batesville Casket Company and American Furniture Company and Hill-Rom Furniture Company. And I became personnel director and organized the personnel department. I did not live a gay life. I was passing for straight, I guess you would call it, and was active with people that belonged to the country club and dated a nurse and went dancing at the Eagles Club. We joined the Eagles Club. And after a year of that, the nun that was the purchasing agent ran off in the middle of the night with the maintenance man. So the next morning,
Were they both married?
well, the nun was the bride of Christ, and he had
Oh, she was a nun.
nun, yes,
Oh my god.
and he had a wife and kids, yes,
Oh
in
shit.
town.
Oh my god. This is a small town.
So I took over the purchasing department and reorganized the purchasing department and set up a perpetual inventory. Now this made me personnel director and purchasing agent, and I did that for another year. And then in that year, the nun that was running Central Supply Department was always fussing with the nun that was in nursing service, who was over her technically, and the administrator didn't know what to do. And of course, me with my big mouth, I said, well, I can tell you what to do. Take it out from nursing service and give it to me, and there won't be any problems. Well, because I was a graduate nurse, according to the regulations in Indiana, I could run the personnel or the Central Supply Department without being under nursing service. So I took over the Central Supply Department and reorganized that and went from a one-room operation to a four-room operation. We expanded it. And by that time, I am running the purchasing department, the personnel department, and the Central Supply Department.
The other thing I want to ask about is, was this place where the locker room was segregated? Was this that hospital?
No, that was St. Elizabeth. Do you think I should bring that in?
No, I think it's interesting.
Okay, I have to go back to when I was at St. Elizabeth Hospital. I was assistant personnel director
That was in Covington.
in Covington, yeah, and Kentucky. And one of my jobs was to be in charge of the locker rooms. Well, they had one locker room for professional people, nurses and office people, office personnel, and then and ward clerks, and another locker room for the nurses' aides and the dietary and housekeeping people. And I noticed that one ward clerk was in the aide locker room, nurses' aide locker room, and all the rest of them were in the professional locker room. So I asked the then director of nursing why that was done, and she said, well, it was done that way because the former director of nursing, who happened to be a nun, by the way, wanted it that way. And I said, well, you realize it's wrong. I said, it's discrimination. And it is not only discrimination, I said, it's discrimination that we can be caught at.
Because the ward clerk was black.
Black. The ward clerk was black, yeah. So I said, she has to be moved over to the other locker room unless she wants to stay there. So I called her in and asked her, I said, do you want to be in that locker room? And she said, no. And I said, well, I'll go into the other locker room and pick out a locker and come back and tell me the number. And that'll be your locker then. That was fine. And a week later, I'm up in the payroll department, and the payroll clerk was fussing. And she says, I don't know. Someone put that, well, she didn't say black woman, honey. She said nigger, into our locker room. And she said, I don't know who did it. But she said, I'm going to go to the administrator about it. And I said, well, I did it. But I said, I think if you feel that you should go to the administrator, if you think it's wrong, maybe you should take it up with administration and she can change it, Well, it was Sister Teresa, whom I knew for several years. And she's the one that insisted when she was director of the School of Nursing at St. Francis in Columbus that they had to admit black students because she says it's wrong not to have, admit everybody. So I knew just how far this payroll clerk would get with the administrator. Well, it wasn't too long after that till the payroll clerk was gone. She got another job. But that's another interesting point I'll bring up while I'm on this subject is that Kentucky being a southern state, it was tended towards segregation, and which was really not supposed to happen in state institutions. And we got a lot of our employees, especially aides, non-professional people, from the local Bureau of Employment Services, state agency. Well, they would ask us, do we want a white person or a black person? Well, there wasn't any question about, hiring black people, because we had this, we really didn't care. And ordinarily we didn't care. So when we would call and ask, to send out a prospective person to work there, aide or whatever we had open, and they'd say, do you want a white person or a black, or don't you care? Well, if we said we want a white person, they would write on the job request AM. And if we wanted a black person, they would say PM. Or if we didn't care, then they would write noon.
Another thing I want to go back to digress back again is about the 50s. We went through it pretty quickly. It's about the Rosenberg trial and execution and the McCarthy era, and whether any of that affected you. Do you remember anything about those?
I just knew that it happened, that the Rosenbergs were found guilty of supposedly giving the atom bomb to Russia and were executed, and that there were a lot of people protesting that execution. I didn't read anything much about it, so I didn't know whether it was justified or not. I do remember there, again, hearing about the McCarthy era, that there was this witch hunt in Washington, D.C. for, it was homosexuals and communists, wasn't it?
Yeah, well, it started out as communists and he went on.
And the only thing I can think of is there used to be a saying that when you met someone in Washington and you asked them where they worked, that they said, well, I work at state, was equivalent to saying I'm gay. But that did not affect me. Now, the only thing, in a minor way, it did. When I was a student nurse, we got $20 a month. And of course, I got that when I was at Bellevue. And the first month I was at Bellevue, they wrote and sent me this form and said, we cannot give you your check until you return this form signing it, stating that you are not a member of the Communist Party. Well, I wasn't a member of the Communist Party, but I thought that if I did want to be, that should be my business and my right to be. So I wouldn't sign the form. Well, after a couple months of not getting any money, I signed the damn form and sent it back so they'd send me my check. But
what year was that?
Well, that would have been 49 and 50.
Yeah, okay.
Say.
Wow.
And it got into we were students. We were employees of the state of Florida, because it was a state hospital.
Yeah.
And I felt that, as I said, I wasn't a communist, but I thought if I wanted to be, I think that's been my personal business, and I should be allowed to. But I finally sent it back. And now there we go. I'm digressing again. Where was I?
Back
Okay,
Batesville.
I think I'm in Batesville. I'm about ready to leave Batesville. In 1962, 63, the nuns gave up that hospital because it was hard to staff. It was having financial problems. The Hillenbrand family was doing a lot to support that hospital, and they felt that really the community should take it over and be responsible for it. So the nuns gave it up and went back to the mother house in Cincinnati, and they got in a lay administrator and a board of governors, governing board or whatever they call it then. And I stayed there until I think August of 63. Well, I've been increasingly bored with my job. I was running the 3 departments. Everything was moving smoothly. I covered the central supply department on Sunday, so I didn't have to hire extra help, save the hospital money. And it almost made me working almost 7 days a week. It did take a lot of my time, and I would get irritable. And about every 7 months, someone would say, Bob, why don't you go to New Orleans for a week? I'll take you to the airport. So I would check with the administrator, and they would usually say, yes, you can take a week off and go to New Orleans. And I would fly down to New Orleans for a week, and I really didn't do anything when I got there. I, of course, usually stayed at the St. Charles Hotel until they tore that down, and then I stopped staying there. And I would go to the gay bar. My favorite at that time was the Galley House. In fact, I think that's the only. There was one at one time called Regent's Row that I went for a while. But it was just living in a gay environment, I think, that kind of relaxed me, because I would booze all afternoon, and then at 5 o'clock I would stop boozing, and I would go to the cathedral and sit and meditate from 5 till 6, the required hour of fasting. Then at 6 o'clock I'd attend Mass and communion, and then from then I'd go back out and start boozing again. My favorite was Stingers. And I'd booze till 2:30 or 3 in the morning, and then go to bed, start the same thing over the next day. And after about a week of that, I would be relaxed, and I would fly back to Batesville, Indiana, ready to start the round again. But I was really getting bored. As I say, it was a comfortable place. I had friends that belonged to the country club when we'd go over there to drink and things. And I really wasn't satisfied with my life. And I'd been corresponding, sending money to this Indian mission up in South Dakota. Father Augustine wanted help up there. So I wrote to him and said I wanted to go up there and work with the Benedictines. And so he had a reference from my pastor and a few other people and invited me to come up, which I did. And I flew up there. They took me into Indianapolis the night before I left. The pharmacist was gay, and the orderly that worked there was gay. Inhalation therapist, I think he was by then, was gay. And so they took me in to dinner and then took me to a gay bar in Indianapolis. And I don't even remember the name of that bar. It seems to me it was something like Mary Jo's or something like that. And that was the only time I went to a gay bar in Indianapolis. And the next morning then I flew up to Pierre, South Dakota.
So there really wasn't any kind of gay community in Batesville.
No. There were several known gay people, but I didn't associate with them.
The wealthier families?
No. I'm trying to think who they were. One of them, was working class family, but he had a lover, and I know he broke up, and the guy sat at one of the straight bars and cried because he went away and his lover left him. And it upset the gay guy that owned the bar, the straight guy that owned the bar, to think that a guy would sit there and cry over losing a man. And it was just sort of, I guess, accepted, It seemed to me there was a couple of them, but I don't remember who the other one was. So anyway, I don't know. I was worked with the Benedictines from 68, August of 68, until July of 74. They had boarding schools for Indians. There was 2 different missions. I was at St. Immaculate Conception Indian Mission near Pierre, South Dakota, for 4 years, and then I went over to St. Paul's Indian Mission at Marty, South Dakota, for the next 2 years. And I wasn't living a gay life. I was living under vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. And there's really nothing there to say about those years. So I'll bring it up to August of 74 when I left St. Paul's Mission. And
so one very important thing happened while you were there, Stonewall riot.
Okay, but I never even heard of it.
But you didn't hear about it at all there.
Uh-uh.
Okay, so you basically went before the real big stuff happened. It came back right in the middle of it.
Yeah. And so when I left there in August of 74, I came to Hilliard, Ohio, Columbus, to my sister's and spent a few weeks visiting her, and then flew down to New Orleans intending to live there. And I rented an apartment. Only stayed there about a month. I wasn't happy there. I was missing something, and I didn't know what it was. I thought once I got there, I'd be, it would be just fun. And I called this friend of mine that used to work on the mission that had gone to his home in Indiana. His family was involved with the charismatic community. So I went to live in their house and become a part of the charismatic community. Well, obviously it wasn't a gay life there. And after 6 months, the Holy Spirit told the head of the household that where he wanted us was in South Bend, Indiana, at Notre Dame with that charismatic community. So 5 people, 5 households there in I want to say Partridge, Indiana, but it wasn't. It wasn't that. But anyway, 5 households of people sold their houses and moved each family to South Bend, Indiana, so we could be member of the People of Praise community, charismatic community. And I did, and I was a member then for till January of '76. I was a member of the People of Praise charismatic community in South Bend, Indiana. One of the procedures that we had to go through, we had training courses, telling us how to act in the community and all that, and how to live, was the deliverance session. And so 2 of the elders would come over and they prayed and they put their hands on my shoulder. And one says, "I sense the spirit of fornication." So I had to renounce the spirit of fornication, which I already renounced anyway. And then another one says, "I sense the spirit of witchcraft." Well, the only reason he knew that is because he knew I had taken a course in witchcraft at one time or other. But anyway, he sensed it then. And I renounced the spirit of witchcraft, which I already had anyway. And that was the end of that. Well, there weren't any jobs in South Bend. And it was okay. I could still live in the community without work. I did free work, in the offices of the charismatic community. But it bothered me because I didn't have a job. My sister wrote and said, "Well, you really aren't that happy there. Why don't you come home and back to Columbus?" So in January of '76, I came back to Columbus and to stay. And I stayed out at my sister's until March of that year of '76. I got a job with the state of Ohio in their data entry section. What do you call it? Computer Services Center. And I lived at the YMCA. Well, of course, there were a lot of things going on at the Y that I was aware of, but I kept myself to myself and really didn't mix until about January of '78, when a guy moved in next door to me, who I made friends with, and lo and behold, I found out he was gay. So at that time, I started going to several of the bars here in Columbus. We went to the Trade Winds once, and the Kismet ones, and the Grotto ones. And I really wasn't into the bar scene because I still was living a celibate life. And I didn't drink that much, and I think, to me, the only reason for going to the bars was to pick up someone or get drunk. So I didn't go out that much. And finally, this friend of mine, neighbor, and his picked up a lover, and the 3 of us moved out of the Y and got an apartment. It was about that time that would be about, 79. And I started taking classes at Ohio State University and joined the Gay Alliance at Ohio State.
What about your MCC? When did that come out?
Oh, it was about that time too. We started, Elmer and I started going to the Metropolitan Community Church in Columbus, and I was one of the charter members of this Columbus church. It seemed to me like the men in that church were full of more larger numbers, but the women were running it. And I know one day, coming back from church, my roommate Elmer said, "Bob, you sure do get along with these lesbians at church." He said, "You'd probably have a sex change operation just so you could check up with a dyke." Well, you go back to Cincinnati, I was used to being around, lesbians. But I noticed also that there seemed to be a little friction between lesbians and gay men, and I couldn't really understand it. Metropolitan Community Church wasn't that well supported in Columbus, and I think it has to do with 2 things. One is that Columbus people are dumb. Now, I was born here, I can say that. Columbus is a large town with a small town mentality. That is one factor. The other factor, I think, is that on all the other gay organizations, you are there because you're gay. Now, the basis of a church membership is belief in the doctrine of that particular church. That's why I became a Catholic, because I believed in what the Catholic Church taught. Now, you take people that come from different religious backgrounds and try to be members of the same church simply on the basis that they are gay. I think that you look for problems, because that isn't enough background in the religious content. But I went there for a few months and really wasn't satisfied. And because my lifestyle is not incompatible with any of the mainline churches, I went back to the Catholic Church where I felt comfortable and belonged. In the meantime, I'm going full-time to OSU and am a member of the OSU Gay Alliance. Now, what do we want to say about that? What do you want?
Oh, I don't know. I'll think of something. But do you have anything else you want to say about it?
Our house got the award one year for what was it? We were entertaining Gay Hotel Award of the Year
From the Gay Alliance.
from the Gay Alliance, because we had a lot of parties here for Gay Alliance, and we would have fundraisers here. We did coffee houses here for fundraiser for Gay Alliance, and what they would start at 11 o'clock when the bar closed. And this is an old Victorian house, and we would have dancing in the living room, games and cards in the dining room, conversation and visiting in the family room,
It's an old parlor.
A keg of beer and munchies in the kitchen. And then on the third floor attic, we had dirty movies, drugs, and sex. Of course, I never got up to the attic. I weighed 400 pounds, so I never made it up to the attic. I had to skip that part.
You never really mentioned the part where you started putting your weight on. Where was that in your timeline?
I think it really started after I graduated from nursing. And one thing is I had the money to eat, to buy extra food. And I think subconsciously it was a flight from homosexuality, in that if I knew that one thing you cannot be, well, two things you can't be in the gay community is old and fat. And that if I would put on weight, then I would be unattractive to other gay people, so I wouldn't have the opportunity to become involved sexually.
Now, did you do this consciously or subconsciously?
I think it was a subconscious thing.
What point did you become conscious?
I
mean, you had Freudian training.
I know I really didn't think about it until about 3 or 4 years ago. I know when my roommate at that time started to put on weight, and I said, Elmer, if you want to be active in the gay community, you cannot be heavy. He said, you're just telling me why you're heavy, don't you? And then I began to think about it, and I thought I sought psychological counseling, trying to cut down on my eating, and I thought it through, and I realized that is what I had been doing. Now it's almost out of control. Like it controls me, rather than I control it. I do say I look younger than 60. At one point, I was elected, my roommate and I were elected on the council for the Gay Alliance at OSU, and someone came into the office complaining about our organization being ageist. And my roommate said to the staff person that was staffing the office, why did you say that one of our council persons is almost 60 years old? And they said, well, because I don't think of Bob as being 60. That is where we are now. I think we're up to 1984.
One thing that, since you've lived here, we've lived together, 2 years, you've really gotten into drag.
Yeah. You really think so?
Well, how many men do I know had at least 4 strings of pearls and have had 2 dresses made? And why do you think you've really gotten into drag at this point in your life? You didn't do it. Well, no, you had that one time.
Just that one dress, but I never really wore it except that in the hotel.
And threw down the air shaft.
One thing I think is that where I've reached a point in life where I don't care what people think. As you know, we had that La Caja Pole party, and afterwards we all went out to breakfast at the Village Junction in drag, and it really didn't bother me, And it's something that I always wanted to do, I guess, and didn't have the nerve to do it until now. And I know I have these 2 dresses that the dressmaker made, but you surely wouldn't expect me to wear off the rack, would you? And pearls, the reason I have so many pearls is because being a 400-pound person, I have just this large amount of chest space that has to be something done with it. So it just makes a nice spot for a bed of pearls.
Another thing that's happened since your sister did pass away.
You know,
Over the years, what did she always have a positive or just no reaction to the things you would do? Or
well,
no, there was one point where you lived with her and you had a man over to visit,
yeah,
and she didn't want you to have him in for some reason or another.
no. What it was that, see, when I came out of the Army and I told her I was gay, you know, and she wanted to meet some of my friends, and I don't know whether I covered this before, that at that time on Saturdays, 8 of us were meeting at Broad and High at the Wagon Wheel Restaurant for lunch. And so I took her, and there she was, sitting at this big round table with 8 other guys. And afterwards, she says, "Were all those guys queer?" And I said, "Yes." And she says, "Well, they seem like nice young gentlemen." Well, what it was about that time, she was sharing an apartment with her husband was in service, and she was sharing an apartment with her friend, and they were going away for the weekend, but the paper hangers were coming. And she wanted me to come and stay at her house over the weekend, be there with the paper hangers. And I said, "Well, that's all right, but just so you know that I have a date that night, and I'll have to bring him there." And she said, "Well, that's all right." So when she got back and everything was, she says, "Now, you'll have to bring that guy back to the house again, so he doesn't see that we live like that," because she'd had the furniture, everything was down and the furniture was disarranged for the paper hangers. So that she says, so that he doesn't see that we live like that all the time. That was her only reaction to that. And after that, we just never discussed my being gay. It was just, and now I am more open, even before the last few years before my sister died, with my niece, who I spend a lot of time with. And she was going to Ohio State several years ago, and she had majored in, her undergraduate degree was in horse training. And she said, "Oh, I think I'm going to tell the guys the Gay Alliance is having a night at Scioto Downs. I'll tell them that's a good time if they want to get fixed up." And so I thought, well, now this is just a good time for me. And I let my hair down to her and let her know that I was gay.
She hadn't known before that.
I don't know whether she suspected or not.
Your sister knew all those years and never told?
I guess not. So now I'm quite open with her. She comes to the house here, and it doesn't bother her. And I took her to Metropolitan Community Church one time to interview someone for a project in her class. And
what has been the impact of the gay liberation and women's liberation movement on your life?
Well, I think I've been more open about my gayness. First of all, as in my younger days, you had to keep your gay life separated from your working life. And so there was this dichotomy between the two. Remember, I grew up when psychology was saying we were sick. The church was saying we were sinners. So I knew that I was wrong as far as society is concerned, but what could I do? I'm me. There's nothing I can do to change. So that, and my whole life, I think, has been a conflict between my natural desire to be gay and my religious values, which say it's wrong. You can see that in that I when I worked in the hospital, I sublimated my personal life to my work life. I went to the mission and hid behind the church, because if you're living a celibate life, then you're not doing anything. So you must not be gay. And when I came back then to Columbus and found how things had changed, Emmett was attending OSU as a gay person. I belonged to Gay Alliance. I staffed the office. In 4 or 5 of my sociology courses, my projects were along gay lines.
I remember at one point, wasn't there a discussion that the office manager didn't want you to answer the phone, so they didn't feel that you were accepting enough of your sexuality to be a good role model?
Well, the office manager, who was first class horse's ass, I want that on tape anyway, felt that because I live a celibate life, I would do irreparable harm to some young person coming in, 18-year-old or young person, coming in and not knowing, what they want to do. Well, of course, I've had enough training and I know enough about counseling that I can only say what's right for me. I don't say what's right for you or anybody else. You have to decide that.
I'm like the person that was making the judgment.
Yes.
What is the way of life you find most enjoyable? Surrounded by all gay friends and culture, or a mixed set?
Well, I guess we're living almost a total gay life, aren't we?
Yeah.
I live in a gay household. My lawyer is gay. My dentist is gay. I did try going to a gay doctor, but there were other reasons why I chose not to continue with him. Most of the friends that I see are gay. So I guess...
other than your family and your professors.
Mm-hmm.
But do you find that most enjoyable? Or have there been other times in your life that you found more enjoyable?
I don't know that it's either one or the other. I'm just happy and satisfied with the way I'm living, just as when I was working at the hospital, I was satisfied with the adjustment I made to that life then.
And that was almost entirely straight.
Yeah, I can do... I can adjust, I guess, to either way. I guess that in this lifestyle, I can be myself. Oh, what I want to say is when I first came back to Columbus and started mixing in gay communities, I felt very uncomfortable in large numbers of gay people. I talked to a counselor about that, and she said, that I wasn't used to it. And I was going through a period of depression. Apparently, I adjusted to a gay environment because I don't feel uncomfortable now. But I noticed that when I first started going to Metropolitan Community Church, just being surrounded by 30 or 40 gay people bothered me somewhere. I don't know why.
What were your feelings about aging when you were young?
Well, of course, when you're young, you talk about old aunties. And you think...
Is that what you've become?
There's nothing worse than an old auntie. And I always said, when I became of that age that I was an old auntie, I was going to retire from the gay life, and I wasn't going to be out chasing young people. Well, because I'm living a celibate life, so there's no temptation to run after young things. And living...
Although I've certainly heard you tease enough.
Like who?
Well, like Steve G.
Oh, well, I was hot for Steve G, honey. But anyway, I would have given up my vows of chastity for him, I think, if I had to. I think it's easier for me to adjust to aging because of my religious outlook, and that I see this as a stage that I'm going through to a better life. I've certainly not been happy with this one, So the next one I expect to be better. So for that and a reason, the probably thing that bothers me most about aging is the physical limitations that maybe are put upon me, that I can't do as many things as I'd like to, which there again I probably could if I lose some weight.
What role did, I guess you answered then and now, but what role did older gay people play in your community? I'm talking about old aunties.
With the exception of that old auntie that owned the house and got replaced, I don't think I had any contact with older gays.
I guess, yeah.
They were invisible.
Especially if they were 50, they would have been born 1880 or something, or 1890s. They would have been really an old crowd. Oscar Wilde would be around back when they were young. Okay. Was there a pivotal experience in your life, one that made your choices clear? That's the last question.
That made my choices clear. Well, I think the pivotal experience is when I last slept with this married man and realized that what I was doing was wrong. I mean, as far as the sexual thing, and then if that's adultery, that's an added guilt thing, that I decided that I had to make a choice one way or another, and so I made it for celibacy. that and when I first came out. But see, when I was in the service, when I went and saw this psychiatrist, he said, and now they tell me that that's unusual, that would have been said in the 40s, that you're not going to change, and the sooner you make an adjustment, accept it, and adjust your life to being gay, the better off you're going to be. So I thought at that time I accepted it. This counselor that I talked to several years ago for depression said that you really didn't accept it, that you were acting out acceptance, but you really didn't accept it. See there,
What point do you think you did accept it then?
I accepted it.
I
You
don't know.
could be more objective about that.
Well,
than I
I
am.
always sort of kid you and tell you that I don't think you're gay or homosexual, but
Okay,
it seems to me maybe I've seen a change in you in the last 2 years. When I first met you in the office, I didn't really think you had accepted. Maybe I just know you better, but you seem, I don't know, you seem to have let loose and become more. I don't know.
I still don't like it. I don't want to be gay, but I think I'm just adjusting to the situation I'm in.
Yeah, but you don't sit around and feel sorry for yourself either.
No.
How do you feel about your two daughters, so to say? What do you think about any comments about?
Well,
I mean, you are a gay auntie, I guess. In a way,
Yeah.
you've taken two people under wing.
okay. This to me is all new. This family crap.
Yeah.
business.
Well, you've become a roles model, sort of.
So that I don't know whether it was going along and I didn't know about it, but I never heard about it until I started going to Ohio State, and I found out that there were these so-called gay families and people were related. And I fought it. I thought it was silly until I had a younger friend that I really liked. And so I adopted him as my gay daughter. And then I had another one that I liked that wanted to be adopted too. So I
couldn't find anybody that would adopt him.
Well, I always did like Joey. As I told Joey, when he cut off that long hair and that mustache, then he couldn't be my masturbatory fantasy anymore because I always thought he was sexy looking, and I like Joey, and so I think I have the two best daughters in Columbus,
Of course.
But I guess I've gotten into that, which is new to me. And there again, I guess it's a substitute gay people have because so many of them are alienated from their families that maybe it's necessary for survival. It's part of your network,
Friendship network. I guess I should say some things about gay
Okay,
alliance.
now, because of this letter from Donald, you asked about my experience with the Gay Alliance. My roommate, who's Brian, who has also been the interviewer, has been quite active and almost has been the backbone of Gay Alliance for as long as I've known him. And so I think at this time I'm going to turn the tape over to Brian so he can tell you a little bit as much as he can about Gay Alliance.
Yeah,
So
I'm just going to fill in what I know. It's a student organization. It was recognized by the university in 1971 after a small amount of controversy. I came to the group in about 1978. Prior to that, was mostly a social organization. There were some political things that went on. There was a sit-down zap in the president's office one time over that time when they were trying to get recognized. Some controversy as they had a sit-down strike. Zap, they called it. But mostly it was pretty low-key as far as I can tell. In Columbus in 1974, they passed the ordinance to protect gay people in housing and public accommodation. Or 75, I think it was.
what about that business?
The mayor did veto the employment protection, however.
What about that business with Judge Boylan that said coming out in drag? When did that happen? In Columbus.
That was about the same time. There was an ordinance against men dressing in women's clothing. A number of people from Gay Alliance were arrested at different parties and things. And file went to court and it was thrown out, mainly because women could wear jeans and not be arrested, and men was discriminatory. So there were some things going on back then. When I came to the group, of course, Nita Bryant was big. She came to Columbus in November of 78. We had a protest outside of the auditorium where she was speaking. or singing, I guess what she was doing. Harvey Milk was shot around that time. I didn't even know who Harvey Milk was at the time. I was just coming out, didn't even know who that was. But the group started changing in the late 70s, about the time that Bob came to the group, and there was some internal controversies because it was a student organization, but the community people were actually running it and spending the money, and some of the students didn't care for that because we felt there were a lot of things could be done on campus with the money. So it became more and more student oriented, and the community people finally left the group in large numbers because they lost the right to vote, for one thing, because the university put their foot down about that. And we became more service oriented. We started doing like referrals to doctors and lawyers and counselors, and got a roommate service started, research archives. We did a lot more service type things. We have about 50 members, I guess. It's not real large considering we have 50,000 students at Ohio State. It's not a very large organization. We do a lot of speaking. Bob's doing speaking engagements a lot. He did mention that. He goes to classes and talks about being gay. Likes to go to the nursing school engagements that go on around here. Talks about that. We try to do publicity as much as we can. We were on TV one time when there was some arrests at a rest stop nearby, and Bob and I and who else? Larry, I guess.
You were not the only two that would go on TV.
No, Larry wouldn't go on TV.
They came to the station.
They came to Bob's house, in fact.
That they called the office and said they wanted to meet with some council persons of GA. And at that time, you and I were both on council.
We just
and so they, I had you and the third council person and the office manager over to my house apartment then for dinner. And when the TV people got there, you and I were the only ones that were willing to be filmed on television. And I remember that was the night that I had all you gay people there for dinner. And at 7 o'clock, I had the Mormon missionaries coming to convert me. And at 7:30, the TV people coming to take pictures. So I was kind of on the hot seat.
So definitely had a lot of activity in our household anyway. And we're very much tied up with gay alliance.
Yeah, and it kind of the TV spot put us on the fence, because as members of the gay organization, we couldn't criticize. But I feel that, if you break the law, you break the law. And of course, I blame the society that people have to go to have to resort to anonymous sex at rest stops and places like that because of the gay lifestyle is not accepted, So it's society's fault, really. But yet, what can you say about someone that does something that knows it's against the law? When they get caught.
You mentioned the Mormons. That's another thing we never talked about was that them and that doctor you have don't believe that you're gay because you are having sex.
The doctor I see at Ohio State Student Health is a black woman doctor who is a Baptist. And I told her when I first had my first appointment with her, and I said, now I'm gay. And because they're treating me for high blood pressure, but immediately they go into the weight. And I explained to her the weight is related, I think, to the fact that I'm gay. And something went on, and I said, well, I'm not having sex. And she said, but you tell me you're gay. And, I said, well, Dr. Clowney, are you having sex? And she said, no. And I said, well, are you still heterosexual? And she said, yes. And I said, well. And the Mormons had the same attitude that because I wasn't living a sexual active life, how could I still be gay? Of course, I wouldn't have understood that if I hadn't read this psychiatrist, this Benedictine psychiatrist, Thomas Verner Moore. And in one of his books, he says that being gay is more than you can be gay without ever having a homosexual experience. I mean, you can be homosexual without having a homosexual experience. That it's a way of thinking and feeling. And that's what brought that home to me, that, it's the total thing, not just having a sexual act. Was there anything special about Columbus they should know? I guess they've heard of Stonewall.
Well, they probably have. We have after the Columbus people left the Gay Alliance, it's called Gay and Lesbian Alliance now, the moral majority began organizing here. And they had a rally, the moral majority did, and it touched off a protest rally by the gay community. And from that, a new organization formed in the community called Stonewall Union, which has been very successful in organizing the community people. And they've got a cable TV show that they produce on the community channel. They have sponsored now 3 gay pride rallies, very well attended. They have been endorsing candidates. They've had candidates taking them down to the gay bars. They have sponsored the state fair booth, which is the largest state fair in the United States. And it was originally run by a statewide organization, which sort of fell apart in the last years, and Stonewall took that over this year and did a very good job on that. So they've been very successful in getting some of the older, moneyed people in the community to contribute money, which is something that the student organization could never quite accomplish. We were seen as being, well, Gay Alliance has a bad reputation, so to speak, as being a radical bunch of screaming queens, which is not true at all. It's a reputation that they have. Stonewall has tried to keep more of a middle class, respectable image, I guess.
Well, I think that this paper I'm doing for Sociology of Class, I looked into Stonewall, and they have 350 members, paid members, voting members. But at the last election, there were only 80 members present to vote, and their board of 20 is composed, I would say, at least 16 of the board of directors are, what would you say, professional people, upper class?
Dentists and counselors, lawyers.
So that you have this diversified membership, but when it comes to electing the board,
they have cocktail parties, things like that, instead of beer parties like we have. It's a different type of image to project. So, and then there was recently an attempt to get City Council to pass the employment protection, which was vetoed by the mayor back in the early 70s. And what happened was Stonewall had it all laid out and had lobbied with the city council members and thought that they had it in the bag. And the fundamentalist Christians bust in, just hundreds of people, I guess, and packed the chambers, and this became a big mess, screaming, shouting mess. And it was defeated unexpectedly.
Is there anything else going on in Columbus with gay nature that we should?
We have quite a few bars. Unlike times you're talking about, we have like 5 bars. There's a Baz here now. The AIDS epidemic has hit us somewhat. We've got an AIDS task force, which Bob has volunteered to help with also, to help. What's the major purpose of that?
There's the Columbus AIDS Task Force, and which is a group of professional people, and then within that, they're forming a group of home volunteers, which are trying to arrange giving care to AIDS victims so that they can leave the hospital and have terminal care in their homes. And the volunteers would be involved with this. And so that they don't die. As a gay person, they aren't died surrounded by hospital equipment and non-people to support them. So that it's a support group for people that are dying with AIDS.
And another thing that Bob has been indirectly, at least, working with is the Wildstein Research Fund, which is something that I've tried to get set up through the university, which is to take money from people so they can have tax deductions down to the development fund of the university, and then we take the money. It's made up of faculty and staff and students. They're all gay, except for the one person, to buy films and books and things. And Bob gave some money to have a film purchased for the university to use. And now we're trying to get another one done, and so that's a new thing that's interesting. I think that's,
yeah, that's important.
Yeah, because the university, especially these days when things are turning so conservative.
But one thing I think is unusual to me is that when I was taking psychology of women, or sociology of women, and we had this guest lecturer who was displaying women's art because she had done a project as an undergraduate student on women's art. And she announced to this class and said, as an undergraduate, I expected to live a life of committed lesbian relationship. And of course, something happened and she did get married. But there she was associated with the development. I think she was with the development fund people in the university. But a university employee who would announce that,
Yeah.
to a class. I thought was
Well, and then Rhonda Rivera, who is an assistant dean of the law school and very
Yeah.
openly gay. She appears on television, and I mean, the law school knows that she's gay. The governor of Ohio this last year signed an executive order protecting all state employees from discrimination.
Yeah. What about this episode? Why don't you tell about this episode with Larry G, when his name appeared inadvertently in the Lantern?
Well, he was one of the council members of the Gay Alliance, and he wrote a letter to our student newspaper. I forget what it was even about, but it was about some issue. I think it was when the fundamentalist Christian group called OSU Bible Studies was discriminating against gay members, telling them they had to become straight or they couldn't be members of the group. And we had protection on campus against such discrimination. And so we brought charges of discrimination against them, and it got into a big mess. And basically, the university let them have their religious freedom, which is, I guess, okay. But he wrote a letter anyway, and wouldn't sign a letter, told him he didn't want his name used because he was in vet school, he was a graduate student, and it's very subjective grading, and he was in the closet. Well, the letter comes out, and they put his name on it anyway, without his permission. So I forget who he even called. He was really worried.
We called Rhonda, I think, first.
He called Rhonda Rivera, the assistant dean of law school, and he gets a phone call suddenly from the president of the university's office, not the president himself, but an assistant or a secretary, assuring him that the president was concerned about the situation, that if he had any problems whatsoever, that he was to immediately contact the president, and that he shouldn't suffer any discrimination because of what inadvertently happened. So we had support from that.
Well, what amazes me is, when I first started going to Ohio State, when I came out of the Army, I was going to go there under the GI Bill, and this guy said, well, you have to be careful at Ohio State. You have 2 strikes against you, one being the blue discharge and being gay. And when I went there then in 1951 as a graduate nurse, I had to be undercover. And now I come back, and even regardless of the, in 3 or 4 of my sociology classes who were non-gay instructors, my project was always along gay lines, and there was nothing said. It was accepted, which I think is good.
How'd you find out about SAGE?
When I was doing this project, the problems of the urban gay male, and problems of the aging gay male in an urban environment, I think you told me there was an article about SAGE in the Inquirer, or the Advocate. The Inquirer, God help us. I think it was the Advocate, or something in the archives, the reference file up at the GA office. And in there it mentioned SAGE, and so I called them.
Oh, you called.
And they sent me manila envelope full of material, that I used in my class. And at that time as a student, I really wasn't able to do anything. So when I was working then and had the money, then they appealed to OSUGA for funds, and OSUGA couldn't afford it. And then I answered that and then became a member. Because I was and when I was thanking them, I wrote them, I said, I'm doing this because, and thanks for your help that you gave me when I was needed it. And also because I believe in their organization. And I've just renewed my membership this week.
Are there any other older people still around in Columbus that you knew when, your age?
There is one that I worked with, and I've lost track of him, and I wish I could, because he goes back, he could tell you a lot more than I could about Columbus. In fact, I'd like to get him on tape, because once you get him yakking, his tongue goes like a bell clapper, loose at both ends and flopping in the middle. But he could tell you things. Now, he knew of me when I was young and coming out, but he said that I was a different class there than he was. That he was hanging around the streets, and that's why I didn't know him. But he knew a lot of people I knew that were active in the Columbus gay life. Those probably better than I did. Because, as I say, being a street fairy, he was into more things than I was. But I don't know how to get a hold of him.
He's the only person you know from that era.
Yeah, I understand there's someone that lived at the house on Governor Place that works over at Battelle, but I hesitate to call him at work. Those are the only 2 I can think of from that era. See, gay people just aren't visible. Although I did meet someone that lives in the village at Mark McIntosh's that was 57. At that time I was 57. That would have been my age. But I don't know how long he lived in Columbus. Well, have we covered everything that they want to know in there?
Yeah, pretty much.
I think it mentioned use of dildos. I never used anything like that. Did I mention when I was at Bellevue in this?
Yeah, you didn't talk about your water sport experience.
Oh, well, I don't call that water sport. One day, it was a hot day, a summer day at Bellevue, and I was in this student nurse's room, and we were naked and drinking beer. And I said, what if we put our dicks in the beer and then lick it off of each other's dick? And I did. We did. And is that water sports?
No, that time you used to take us. There was somebody who used to get.
That was in Chattahoochee. This was this little student. We were sisters. And I don't know, we never had sex, but we used to shower together. And I used to like to lay on top of him, and I always wanted to pee on him. And of course, he could tell when I was getting ready to pee, and then he'd jump up. I mean, it's not water sports, really, because we didn't do much.
You never really peed on him?
No, maybe a little dribble. But that was, he was a student after I graduated. Well, he was a student when he started a student, I was still a student. Then after I graduated and started working there, we worked a 12-hour shift, 6 days a week for $180 a month. And I used to pay this student $5 a month to make my bed every day, to give me a back rub every night, and to polish my white shoes. He was kicked out of training and went to one of the New York hospitals. I think it was it Harlem State Hospital? One of those up around there that he graduated from there. And it's funny that I went to one of the Right to Life meetings here in Columbus, and the woman was passing out literature, and she's the wife of the administrator of St. Anthony Hospital. And they both were nurses, and they both had been trained in the state hospital, and was at Bellevue relatively around the time I was at Bellevue, too. Let's see, is there nothing going on about the bars that unusual is there in Columbus? Actually, and also Stonewall Union, has a group called Stonewall PAC, so that they are making contributions to candidates.
Black and White Men Together group.
Oh yeah, Black and White Men Together. I forgot
We
about
have
that.
Dignity, Integrity.
Lutherans Concerns, is that actually?
Well, it's a small group. We have a parenting group. It's lesbian and gay people that have children. We have a group now for bisexual men or heterosexual marriages.
What about that Whack House? Was that a lesbian group?
Well, it was a Women's Action Collective. It was all kinds of different women's organizations. There were a lot of lesbian. There is a feminist coffee house called Calico's just down the street from where we live. It's open to everyone.
Oh, I'll tell you, isn't there an older lesbian group now started?
It's an older lesbian group.
In Columbus.
I don't know. I think they consider older 35 and older. We do have a youth group for 19 and younger that Gay Alliance has meeting in their office. It's about 4 years old now.
Also, did you mention that Gay Alliance has orientation programs for each quarter at Ohio State for new students?